Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Thomas Davis, and I am 32 years old. This happened in Blackwater Falls State Park, deep in the Monongahela National Forest of West Virginia. What began as a weekend hiking trip with my friends turned into something I still struggle to comprehend, something that haunts my dreams and makes me afraid to close my eyes at night. There were 5 of us: myself, my longtime friend from college Kevin King, our work colleagues Jason Adams and Emily Hall, and Kevin's girlfriend Rebecca Hill. We all worked at the same marketing firm in Pittsburgh and had been planning this trip for months as a way to escape the pressures of our upcoming client pitch. I'd been to the Appalachians before, but never to this particular area, which Kevin had enthusiastically recommended for its seclusion and pristine trails. "You won't believe how quiet it gets out there," Kevin had said, his eyes alight with excitement as we planned the route over beers one evening. No cell service, no tourists, just pure wilderness. In retrospect, I should have paid more attention to the unnatural emphasis he placed on the word quiet. We arrived on a Friday afternoon in early October. The fall colors were just beginning to transform the landscape into a tapestry of amber, crimson, and gold. The air was crisp with that distinct autumn chill that makes you feel alive, carrying the earthy scent of decaying leaves and pine. We parked at a small, unmarked lot at the trailhead that Kevin had somehow known about, despite it not appearing on any of the official park maps. "Trust me," he'd said with that crooked smile of his, "I found this spot last year. It leads to the best views in the park." Jason, always the cautious one, had frowned at this. "Shouldn't we stick to the marked trails? I've read about people getting lost out here." "Where's your sense of adventure?" Rebecca had teased, playfully shoving his shoulder. She and Kevin had been dating for only a few months, but they shared the same reckless enthusiasm for the outdoors. Besides, Kevin knows these mountains like the back of his hand. I noticed Emily glancing uneasily at the dense forest ahead but saying nothing. She was the newest addition to our friend group, having joined the company only 6 months prior. She was reserved, thoughtful, with an analytical mind that had quickly earned her respect at work. I caught her eye and gave what I hoped was a reassuring smile. "It'll be fine," I said, hoisting my backpack. "Kevin hasn't gotten us killed yet." Little did I know how those words would come back to haunt me. The first few hours of hiking were pleasantly uneventful. The trail Kevin led us on was narrow but discernible, winding through towering oak and maple trees. The forest floor was a soft carpet of fallen leaves that muffled our footsteps. The only sounds were our occasional conversations, the distant call of birds, and the rhythmic crunch of our boots against the ground. As afternoon faded into evening, we came upon a small clearing that Kevin declared perfect for setting up camp. It was nestled in a shallow valley between 2 ridges, with a small stream gurgling nearby. The clearing was roughly circular, perhaps 30 feet in diameter, surrounded by ancient trees whose highest branches seemed to reach for one another, creating a canopy that left only a small circle of visible sky above. "This place is perfect," Kevin declared, dropping his pack. "I call it Whisper Hollow." "You named it?" Emily asked, setting her backpack down carefully. "Yeah," Kevin replied with a shrug. "Came across it last time I was here. Spent the night. It's special." "Why Whisper?" I asked, feeling a sudden, inexplicable chill despite the physical exertion of our hike. Kevin's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "You'll see when night falls. The wind through these trees. It sounds like whispering." We busied ourselves with setting up camp. 3 tents arranged in a rough semicircle, gathering firewood, and preparing dinner. As the sun dipped below the ridge, Jason got a modest fire going, and we settled around it, passing a flask of whiskey and sharing stories. Rebecca was midway through recounting an encounter with a black bear during her last camping trip when I first noticed it: the stillness. It had fallen upon us so gradually that I hadn't immediately registered its presence, but now it struck me with the force of a physical blow. The forest had gone completely silent. No insects chirping, no rustling leaves, no distant calls of nocturnal creatures awakening for their nightly hunt. Nothing. I glanced at the others to see if they'd noticed. Emily's posture had gone rigid, her eyes darting to the darkened forest around us. Jason was staring intently into the fire, his brow furrowed. Only Kevin and Rebecca seemed unperturbed, continuing their animated conversation. Then came the whispers. At first, I thought it was just the wind through the trees, as Kevin had described. A soft, susurrant sound, almost like the static of a radio tuned between stations. But there was no wind. The air was completely still, yet the sound persisted, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Do you hear that?" Emily suddenly asked, her voice unnaturally loud in the quiet clearing. Kevin glanced up at her, that same strange smile playing at his lips. "The whispers? I told you. That's why I named this place." "It's just the wind," Rebecca added, but there was something forced about her casual tone. "There is no wind," Jason pointed out, standing up to look around. "What the hell is that sound?" The whispers seemed to intensify, as if responding to our acknowledgement of them. I strained to make out words, patterns, anything familiar in the noise, but it remained just beyond comprehension, a tantalizing, almost language that teased the edges of understanding. "It's nothing to worry about," Kevin assured us, poking at the fire. "Just a quirk of the acoustics in this hollow. Sound carries weirdly here. It's probably just distant water or wind from higher up the mountain." His explanation made sense, and I felt my tension ease slightly. Still, I noticed that Emily had moved closer to the fire, her arms wrapped around herself despite the warmth of the flames. "I don't like it," she said quietly, her eyes fixed on the darkness beyond our camp. "It feels wrong." "You're just not used to being away from the city," Rebecca said dismissively. "Nature has its own sounds." "This isn't nature," Emily insisted, her voice taking on an edge I'd never heard before. "This is something else." An uncomfortable silence fell over our group, broken only by the persistent whispering from the surrounding forest. Kevin finally sighed and stood up. "Look, if it's bothering everyone this much, we can move camp tomorrow. But it's too dark now, and we're already set up. Let's just get some sleep, and everything will seem less creepy in the morning. Okay?" No one argued. We doused the fire and retreated to our tents, Kevin and Rebecca in one, Jason and Emily each in their own, and me in mine. As I lay in my sleeping bag, I could still hear the whispers, somehow audible even through the fabric of my tent. They seemed to rise and fall in intensity, occasionally swelling to a frenzied pitch before subsiding again. I must have eventually fallen asleep, because the next thing I knew, I was awakened by a scream. I bolted upright, momentarily disoriented in the pitch blackness. The scream had been short, abruptly cut off, and I couldn't tell who it had come from or which direction it had originated. I fumbled for my flashlight and unzipped my tent, tumbling out into the clearing. The night was oppressively dark, the sliver of moon above providing barely enough light to make out the shapes of the other tents. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating patches of ground, tree trunks, the edge of Jason's tent. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and feeble in the vast silence. "Is everyone okay?" The whispers had stopped, I realized. The forest was now completely, unnaturally silent. One by one, the others emerged from their tents. First Jason, then Kevin and Rebecca. All looked as confused and frightened as I felt. "Who screamed?" Jason demanded, his own flashlight beam dancing erratically around the clearing. "I thought it was you," Kevin said, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Where's Emily?" Rebecca suddenly asked, and my blood ran cold. We all turned toward Emily's tent. It was zipped shut, appearing undisturbed in our flashlight beams. "Emily," I called out, moving toward her tent. "Are you okay?" No response. With mounting dread, I approached the tent and slowly unzipped the entrance. My flashlight revealed an empty sleeping bag neatly laid out as if waiting for its occupant to return. "She's gone," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "That's impossible," Jason said, pushing past me to look inside the tent himself. "Where would she go in the middle of the night?" Kevin and Rebecca exchanged a look that I couldn't interpret. "Maybe she went to use the bathroom," Rebecca suggested. But her voice lacked conviction. "And screamed? And didn't come back?" Jason's voice cracked with barely contained panic. "We need to find her," I said, trying to remain calm. "She can't have gone far. Let's spread out and search the immediate area. Everyone take a direction and call out if you find anything." "We shouldn't split up," Jason argued. "Haven't you ever seen a horror movie?" "This isn't a movie," Kevin snapped. "And the faster we cover ground, the faster we find Emily." Against my better judgment, we separated, each taking a different direction from the clearing, calling Emily's name as we went. I headed east, my flashlight sweeping across the forest floor, illuminating twisted roots, fallen logs, the occasional startled eyes of small nocturnal creatures. I had ventured perhaps 50 yards from camp when I found the first blood splatter. It was a small spot, easily missed if not for the way my flashlight caught its glossy wetness. Fresh. My stomach knotted as I crouched down to examine it. A few feet away, another spot, larger this time. Then another. They formed a trail leading deeper into the forest. I should have gone back to get the others. I should have called out. Instead, some inexplicable compulsion drew me forward, following the grisly breadcrumb trail farther from the safety of our camp. The blood splatters grew larger, more frequent as I continued. Then came the drag marks, long smears in the soft earth as if something heavy had been pulled through the underbrush. My heart hammered in my chest, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps as I forced myself to continue. I stopped short when my flashlight beam fell upon a scrap of fabric snagged on a low-hanging branch. It was from Emily's distinctive plaid flannel shirt, the one she'd been wearing when we set up camp. It was torn and stained with something dark. "Emily," I called out, my voice breaking. "Emily, can you hear me?" The whispering started again, louder this time, seeming to come from directly ahead. I moved forward, guided by the sound until I emerged into another, smaller clearing. What I saw there stopped me cold. Emily was suspended about 6 feet off the ground, her body held spread eagle between 4 trees. But not by rope or wire, by what appeared to be living branches that had somehow grown around her wrists and ankles, binding her to the trees. Her head hung limply forward, her dark hair obscuring her face. Blood dripped steadily from her fingertips to the forest floor below. I stood frozen in horror, unable to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of elaborate sick prank or a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and fear. Then Emily's head slowly lifted. Her eyes, reflecting the beam of my flashlight, were completely black. Not just the iris, but the entire visible surface. Her mouth opened, impossibly wide, stretching beyond what any human jaw should be capable of. And from that gaping maw came not Emily's voice, but the whispers. Thousands of them, layered upon each other, a cacophony of unintelligible voices all speaking at once. I screamed then, dropping my flashlight as I stumbled backward. The beam rolled, illuminating Emily's twisted form for a moment before settling on something else, a figure standing at the edge of the clearing that I hadn't noticed before. It was Kevin. He was standing perfectly still, watching the scene with an expression that wasn't shock or horror, but something akin to reverence. His eyes reflected my fallen flashlight beam with the same unnatural blackness as Emily's. "Kevin?" I gasped, my voice barely audible. He turned to look at me, his movements unnaturally fluid. "You weren't supposed to find her yet, Thomas," he said, but his voice was wrong, layered with the same whispers that emanated from Emily's distorted mouth. "None of you were supposed to wake up until it was time." I scrambled backward, my feet slipping on the damp earth. What the hell is going on? What happened to Emily? What's wrong with you? Kevin smiled, a grotesque stretching of lips that revealed too many teeth. Nothing is wrong with me. I've simply been improved. As Emily is being improved now, as you will be soon. Improved? I echoed stupidly, still retreating. The hollow has been waiting for so long, Kevin continued, taking a step toward me. It needs vessels, strong bodies to carry its influence beyond these woods. I found it last year, you know. Or rather, it found me. I was alone then, and it could only take me. But I promised to bring it more, and I keep my promises. My back hit a tree, stopping my retreat. Kevin continued his approach, moving with that same unnatural fluidity, as if his joints worked differently now. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, desperately trying to keep him talking while I searched for an escape route. "What is it?" Kevin's smile widened impossibly. "The whisper, the voice of the forest. The old ones called it by many names, but none of them matter now. All that matters is that it's hungry, and it's chosen us." From behind him, Emily's suspended body began to twitch and convulse, the branches holding her writhing like tentacles. The whispers emanating from her grew louder, more frenzied. "It's starting," Kevin said with evident delight. "She's almost ready, and once she's complete, we'll go back for the others." The thought of Jason and Rebecca, unaware of what awaited them, spurred me to action. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, I lunged to the side, snatching up my fallen flashlight and swinging it as hard as I could at Kevin's head. The heavy metal connected with a sickening crunch. Kevin staggered but didn't fall. Instead, he touched the spot where I'd hit him, his fingers coming away dark with blood. He looked at it with mild curiosity, then back at me. "That wasn't very friendly, Thomas," he said, the whispers in his voice intensifying. "But it doesn't matter. You can't stop this. None of us can." I didn't wait to hear more. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face and arms as I fled. Behind me, I could hear Kevin's laughter, interwoven with those terrible whispers, following me through the darkness. I had no sense of direction, no idea if I was heading back toward our camp or deeper into the forest. All I knew was that I had to get away, had to find Jason and Rebecca before whatever had taken Kevin and Emily got to them too. By some miracle, I stumbled back into our clearing. The tents stood just as we'd left them, illuminated by the weak moonlight. I rushed to Jason's tent first, tearing open the zipper. Empty. My heart sinking, I moved to Kevin and Rebecca's tent, already knowing what I would find. The beam of my flashlight revealed 2 empty sleeping bags, neatly arranged. I was alone. The whispering started again, coming from all around me now, louder and more insistent than before. Through the cacophony, I could almost make out words now, enticing, promising, threatening, beckoning me to give in, to join the others, to become improved. I grabbed my backpack from my tent, not bothering with anything else, and started running along the trail we'd taken into the hollow. If I could just make it back to the car, back to civilization, I might have a chance. The forest seemed to fight my escape. Roots rose up to trip me, branches swung down to block my path. The very ground beneath my feet shifted and rolled like a living thing. The whispers grew to a roar, drowning out the sound of my own labored breathing and pounding heart. Then, ahead in the darkness, I saw them. Jason and Rebecca standing side by side in the middle of the trail, blocking my way. Even in the weak beam of my failing flashlight, I could see that their eyes had the same unnatural blackness as Kevin's and Emily's. "Join us, Thomas," they said in unison, their voices a blend of their own and that terrible whispering. "The Hollow has chosen you. It's an honor." I skidded to a halt, casting about desperately for another escape route. To my left, the ground sloped steeply downward, a treacherous descent in the darkness. But my only option. I veered sharply and threw myself down the incline. I tumbled and slid, my body collecting cuts and bruises as I crashed through undergrowth and over rocks. The roar of the whispers followed me, but grew fainter as I put distance between myself and whatever entities now inhabited the bodies of my friends. At the bottom of the slope, I found myself on another trail, wider, more clearly marked, an official park trail. Hope surged within me as I staggered to my feet and began running again, following the trail in what I prayed was the direction of the park entrance. Dawn was breaking by the time I reached the parking lot, the first weak rays of sunlight filtering through the trees. My car sat where I'd left it, a beautiful sight that brought tears to my eyes. I fumbled with my keys, glancing constantly over my shoulder, expecting at any moment to see Kevin or one of the others emerging from the forest. As I pulled out of the lot, I caught a glimpse in my rearview mirror, 4 figures standing at the edge of the forest, watching my departure. Even at a distance, I could see that their eyes reflected the early morning light with an unnatural gleam. I reported my friends missing as soon as I reached cell service, but when search and rescue teams combed the area I described, they found nothing. No camp, no signs of Emily's horrific transformation, no evidence that any of us had ever been there at all. The trail Kevin had led us on couldn't be located, and no one at the park had ever heard of a place called Whisper Hollow. Official reports listed Kevin King, Rebecca Hill, Jason Adams, and Emily Hall as missing persons, presumed dead from exposure or animal attack after wandering off trail in Monongahela National Forest. The case remains open, but active searches were called off after 3 weeks yielded no results. I know the truth, though. They're not dead, at least, not in the way the authorities think. They're still out there in the forest, serving as vessels for whatever ancient entity dwells in Whisper Hollow. And sometimes, when I lie awake at night, I can hear them calling to me, their whispers carried on the wind that rattles my windows, inviting me to return, to join them, to be improved. And the most terrifying part? Sometimes I want to answer. Last week I found a small twig growing from the back of my hand, a tiny branch with 3 perfect leaves sprouting from my flesh. I cut it off, but it grew back overnight. I haven't told anyone. I'm afraid of what it means. Afraid that whatever happened to my friends in those woods has followed me home, that the Hollow's influence has taken root inside me. The whispers are getting louder now, more intelligible. They promise power, knowledge, transcendence if I just give in. And every day it gets harder to resist. I'm writing this as a warning. Stay away from unmarked trails in Blackwater Falls State Park. If you find yourself in a perfectly circular clearing surrounded by ancient trees, turn back immediately. And if you ever hear whispers in a silent forest, run. Run as fast and as far as you can. Because once the Hollow chooses you, it never lets go. My name is Laura Adams, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the Monongahela National Forest near Seneca Rocks in West Virginia, just last autumn. I've always been a city girl at heart. Growing up in Philadelphia, my idea of roughing it was staying at a hotel without room service. But when my best friend Megan suggested a hiking trip to celebrate our 15 years of friendship, I reluctantly agreed. She'd been through a rough divorce and needed to get away. How could I say no? It'll be cathartic, Megan had insisted over our weekly coffee. Just you, me, and nature for 4 days. No distractions, no responsibilities. Her eyes had that spark I hadn't seen since before her ex-husband Tyler began his campaign of emotional warfare. No showers, no comfortable beds, and plenty of bugs, I'd countered, but my resistance was already crumbling against her enthusiasm. The drive to Monongahela National Forest took nearly 6 hours from Philly. Megan chattered excitedly the entire way while I silently questioned my life choices. As we wound our way through the increasingly narrow roads of the Appalachians, the towering trees crowded in, their autumn foliage a riot of crimson and gold that would have been beautiful if it didn't feel so confining. "We're almost at the trailhead," Megan said, consulting her GPS. "Just another 15 minutes. I nodded, eyeing the darkening sky. We should hurry if we want to set up camp before nightfall." She laughed. "When did you become such a worrier, Laura? We have headlamps. Besides, I've got the route all planned out. We'll hike about 4 miles today to our first campsite near Spruce Knob." The ranger station was a small wooden building that looked like it had been standing since before the Depression. Inside, an older man with weathered skin and calculating eyes sat behind a desk cluttered with maps and brochures. His name tag read, "Frank Dawson, Senior Ranger." "Afternoon, ladies," he greeted us, his Appalachian drawl as thick as honey. "Heading into the wilderness?" Megan took charge, presenting our permits and outlining our planned route through the Seneca Creek backcountry. Ranger Dawson's eyes narrowed slightly when Megan mentioned we'd be passing near something called the Hollows. He cleared his throat. "That's quite ambitious for first-timers. Maybe stick to the main trails." "Oh, we'll be fine," Megan insisted, waving away his concern. "I've done tons of research." The ranger studied us for a moment longer than was comfortable. "Well, at least promise me you'll stay on the marked paths. Some of those old mining routes can be treacherous, especially after rain." He pulled out a map and circled an area with a red pen. "This whole section here, locals call it the Hollows, has unstable ground from the old coal mines. And with the heavy rains we've had this season..." He let the sentence hang ominously. "We'll be careful," I assured him, suddenly grateful for my obsessive packing that included a first aid kit, emergency beacon, and enough protein bars to survive a minor apocalypse. "One more thing," he added as we turned to leave. "You might hear some strange things at night. The wind through these mountains creates some unusual sounds. Nothing to worry about." Something about the way he said it made my skin prickle. The first mile of hiking was actually pleasant. The weather was crisp but not cold, and the forest was alive with activity. Birds calling, squirrels darting about, leaves rustling. The path was well maintained and gently sloping, lulling me into a false sense that maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. "See? Isn't this better than being cooped up in your apartment grading papers all weekend?" Megan asked, her pace quick and energetic. I had to admit it was. There was something refreshing about being disconnected from emails and student demands. I took a deep breath of the pine-scented air, feeling some of the tension leave my shoulders. "Okay, you were right. This is nice." The trouble began during our second hour on the trail. The path narrowed and became less defined, requiring us to check Megan's trail map more frequently. The gentle slope turned into a challenging incline that had my calves burning in protest. "Are you sure this is the right way?" I asked, pausing to catch my breath. The trees seemed denser here, cutting off much of the fading daylight. Megan consulted her map and GPS. "Yeah, definitely. We just need to keep heading southeast for another 2 miles. Then we'll make camp near Seneca Creek." I took a swig from my water bottle and adjusted my too-heavy backpack. "Lead on, then." Another hour passed, and the woods began to change. The vibrant autumn colors gave way to grayer, sicker-looking trees. Many were dead or dying, their twisted branches reaching up like arthritic fingers. The undergrowth thinned, revealing dark soil that looked almost black in places. "Megan, check the map again. This doesn't look right." She frowned at her phone. "That's weird. We should have hit Seneca Creek by now." She looked up at the sky, which was only visible in patches through the canopy. "And I think we've been heading more east than southeast." A knot formed in my stomach. "Are we lost?" "No, not lost. Just temporarily misplaced. Let me see if I can get a better GPS signal." While Megan fiddled with her phone, I had the distinct feeling we were being watched. I scanned the surrounding forest but saw nothing except trees and shadows. Yet the sensation persisted, like invisible fingers tracing the back of my neck. "Damn it," Megan muttered. "I'm not getting any signal out here." "What about the paper map?" "I can't quite figure out where we are on it. None of these landmarks match up." There was an edge of panic in her voice that I'd never heard before. "Okay, let's not freak out," I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "We can just backtrack to where the trail was clear." Megan nodded, looking relieved to have a plan. Good idea. We turned around and began retracing our steps. At least, we tried to. Within 15 minutes, it became apparent that we couldn't identify our original path. The forest floor was covered in a thick carpet of leaves that showed no clear footprints, and every direction looked frustratingly similar. The light was fading fast now. We needed to make a decision. Let's just make camp here, I suggested. In the morning, we can climb to higher ground and try to get our bearings. It wasn't ideal, but Megan reluctantly agreed. We found a small clearing and began setting up our tent with efficiency born of growing anxiety. As I hammered in the last stake, a sound echoed through the trees, a high, keening wail that was neither human nor animal. We both froze. "What was that?" I whispered. Megan's face had gone pale. "Probably just the wind. Remember what the ranger said?" I nodded, not believing it for a second but grateful for the rational explanation. We finished setting up camp in tense silence, jumping at every snapping twig and rustling leaf. Night fell with alarming swiftness, bringing with it a bone-deep chill that seemed to seep up from the ground itself. We huddled around our small camp stove, eating reconstituted pasta that tasted like cardboard and anxiety. "So," Megan said, clearly trying to lighten the mood, "how's the dating scene in your department? Any eligible professors catching your eye?" I forced a smile. "There's a new environmental science professor who's not terrible to look at. But I don't know, academic politics makes it complicated." She nudged me with her elbow. "Since when does Laura Adams let 'complicated' stop her?" Our laughter felt wrong in the oppressive silence of the forest, like we were intruders at a funeral. That night, I dreamed of digging. In my dream, my hands clawed at the black earth, desperate to uncover something vital buried deep below. But the more I dug, the more the soil seemed to swallow my arms, pulling me down instead. I woke with a gasp, drenched in cold sweat despite the near-freezing temperature. The inside of the tent was pitch black. I fumbled for my phone to check the time. 3:27 a.m. Beside me, Megan's sleeping bag was empty. "Megan," I whispered, heart suddenly pounding. When there was no answer, I called louder. "Megan!" I scrambled out of the tent, flashlight in hand. The beam cut weakly through the darkness, revealing our deserted campsite. The remains of our dinner sat undisturbed. Megan's hiking boots were still neatly placed outside the tent entrance. She'd left barefoot? In near-freezing temperatures? "Megan!" I shouted, panic drowning out any concern about what else might be in these woods. A rustling from behind me made me whirl around. The beam of my flashlight caught a figure at the edge of our clearing. Megan, standing motionless in her pajamas, barefoot on the frozen ground. Relief flooded through me. "Jesus, Meg, you scared the hell out of me. What are you doing out here?" She didn't respond. As I approached, I noticed something wrong with how she was standing. Too straight, too still, and her eyes. They were open but vacant, staring fixedly at something I couldn't see. "Megan." I reached out to touch her shoulder. Her skin was ice cold. At my touch, she blinked slowly, like someone coming out of a trance. "Laura." Her voice was small and confused. "Why are we outside?" "You tell me. I woke up, and you were gone." She looked down at her bare feet, now filthy with dark soil, and shivered violently. I don't remember getting up." I led her back to the tent, wrapping an emergency blanket around her shoulders. "You must have been sleepwalking." "I've never sleepwalked in my life," she mumbled, teeth chattering. I helped her into dry clothes and tucked her back into her sleeping bag. "First time for everything, I guess. Let's try to get some sleep. I'll zip our bags together so I'll notice if you try to wander off again." Despite my brave words, I lay awake for the rest of the night, listening to every sound from the forest around us. Just before dawn, I heard it again, that eerie, keening wail, closer this time. It sounded almost like a name being called, stretched and distorted beyond recognition. When morning finally came, Megan had no recollection of her midnight wandering. I debated whether to even tell her, not wanting to add to her stress, but eventually decided honesty was the better policy. "That's disturbing," she said after I'd explained. "Maybe we should head back today. Try again another time." I was shocked. This retreat was so unlike the stubborn friend I knew. "Are you sure? You were the one all gung-ho about this trip." She rubbed her arms, looking around nervously. "I just have a bad feeling, like we shouldn't be here." I couldn't argue with that. I'd had the same feeling since we'd entered this blighted section of forest. "Okay, let's pack up and try to find our way back." But which way was back? After a quick breakfast, we studied the map again, trying to identify any landmarks that might help orient us. In the daylight, I noticed something we'd missed the day before, a thin line representing an old mining road about half a mile east of our presumed position. "If we can find this road," I said, pointing to it on the map, "it should lead us to a ranger station eventually." Megan nodded, looking more like herself after a cup of instant coffee. Good plan. We packed up camp efficiently and began hiking east, using the weak morning sun as our guide. The forest seemed different in the daylight, less menacing but somehow more wrong. The trees were more obviously diseased up close, with strange fungal growths erupting from their trunks. The ground was oddly sunken in places, creating shallow depressions filled with stagnant water. "What do you think happened here?" Megan asked quietly. "Some kind of blight? Maybe acid rain from the coal plants. This whole region was heavily mined." We pressed on, careful to avoid the boggy areas. After about 40 minutes of hiking, the ground began to slope downward, and we found ourselves in what appeared to be a shallow valley. And there, cutting through the center, was an old dirt road, overgrown but still visible. "The mining road!" Megan exclaimed, her relief palpable. We hurried toward it, our spirits lifting for the first time since we'd gotten lost. According to the map, if we followed this road north, we'd eventually reach a ranger station or at least a main hiking trail. The road was in poor condition, rutted and washed out in places, but it was undeniably a human-made path. As we walked, I noticed remnants of the area's mining past, rusted pieces of machinery half buried in the undergrowth, collapsing wooden structures reclaimed by nature. "Look," Megan pointed to a weathered sign barely legible through years of exposure. "Holloway Mining Co. Keep out." "The Hollows," I murmured, remembering the ranger's warning. "We must be in that unstable area he circled on the map." Megan's pace quickened. "Then let's get through it quickly." We followed the old mining road for about an hour, the valley gradually narrowing around us. The trees pressed closer to the path here, their branches forming a canopy that blocked much of the sunlight. Despite it being midday, it felt like dusk. Then, rounding a bend, we came upon the mine entrance, a dark maw carved into the hillside, partially collapsed but still gaping open like a wound in the earth. The area around it was clear of trees in an unnatural circle, as if nothing would grow near the entrance. Rusted mining equipment lay scattered about, abandoned in what must have been a hurried exit. "Let's keep moving," I said, disturbed by the sight. But Megan had stopped, her head tilted as if listening. "Do you hear that?" At first, I heard nothing but the sighing of wind through the trees. Then, faintly, I caught it. A sound like distant crying, echoing from the darkness of the mine entrance. "It's just the wind," I insisted, though I didn't believe it myself. Megan took a step toward the mine. "It sounds like a child." I grabbed her arm. "Megan, no. That mine could collapse at any moment. Besides, there's no child out here." She hesitated, clearly torn, but eventually nodded. "You're right. Let's go." We continued past the mine entrance, both of us walking faster now. The crying sound faded behind us, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had noticed our presence and was now aware of us. The mining road continued to wind through the valley, which grew increasingly narrow. On either side, the hills rose steeply, creating a claustrophobic channel. I checked the map again. We should be approaching a fork soon. We'll want to take the right path. Megan nodded, but I could tell she wasn't really listening. Since passing the mine, she'd grown quiet and distracted, frequently looking back the way we'd come. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Fine," she said too quickly. "Just tired." We reached the fork in the road about 20 minutes later. The left path continued through the valley while the right began to climb up the hillside. Our way out of this oppressive place, without hesitation I turned right, but after a few steps I realized Megan wasn't following. She stood at the fork, staring down the left path. "Megan, we need to go this way." When she turned to me, her expression was strangely blank. "They need help, Laura." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Who needs help?" "The children, in the darkness. They're trapped." I walked back to her slowly, as one might approach a sleepwalker. "Megan, there are no children here. It's just us." Her eyes focused on me suddenly, clarity returning. She blinked in confusion. "What did I just say?" "You were talking about children needing help," I said carefully. She shook her head. "That's weird. I don't know why I said that." She rubbed her temples. "I have a terrible headache." "Let's get out of this valley," I suggested. "The higher ground will give us a better view and maybe better cell reception." She agreed, and we began climbing the path that led up the hillside. It was steep and slippery with decaying leaves, requiring our full concentration. For nearly an hour we ascended in silence, the exertion temporarily pushing away the unease that had settled over us. When we finally reached the top of the ridge, we were rewarded with a view of the surrounding forest. From this vantage point I could see that the strange blight affected only the valley below us, a dark smear across the otherwise vibrant autumn landscape. The valley itself was roughly circular, like a massive pit that had been partially filled in. "The hollows," Megan murmured. "It looks like a wound." I pulled out my phone, hoping for a signal. Nothing. "Let's keep following this ridge. If we stay on higher ground, we should eventually hit a main trail." Megan nodded, but her movements were sluggish. She looked pale and drawn, with dark circles under her eyes that hadn't been there that morning. "Are you sure you're okay?" I asked. "You don't look good." "Just tired," she insisted, "and my head is killing me." I handed her some ibuprofen and my water bottle. "Take these. We'll rest here for a bit before moving on." We sat on a fallen log, catching our breath and taking in the view. Despite the circumstances, it was beautiful up here. The rolling Appalachian mountains stretching to the horizon, ablaze with fall colors. "I'm sorry I got us into this mess," Megan said suddenly. "I just wanted, I don't know, to feel strong again, after everything with Tyler." "Hey, we're going to be fine," I assured her. "We've got food, water, and shelter. We're already on higher ground with a clear path to follow. Worst case scenario, we spend another night camping and find our way out tomorrow." She smiled weakly. "When did you become the optimistic one?" "One of us has to be, and you're clearly not up for it at the moment." We rested for about 20 minutes before continuing along the ridgeline. The path here was less defined than the mining road had been, but still followable. According to my rough calculations, if we kept heading north, we'd eventually intersect with the main Seneca Creek Trail. The afternoon wore on, and I began to worry about finding a suitable campsite before dark. Megan was moving slower and slower, her earlier energy completely evaporated. Every time I suggested we stop for the night, however, she insisted on pressing forward. "I don't want to spend another night out here," she said, her voice tight with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. Fear? Resolution? So we continued, even as the light began to fade. The ridge eventually sloped downward into gentler terrain, and to my immense relief, we came upon a clearly marked hiking trail. A wooden sign indicated we were on the Seneca Creek Trail, approximately 4 miles from the ranger station. "See? I told you we'd find our way," I said, nudging Megan. She managed to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You were right." With renewed purpose, we hurried along the trail, hoping to reach the ranger station before full dark. The forest here was healthier, with none of the blight we'd seen in the hollows, and it lifted my spirits considerably. We were about 2 miles from the ranger station when Megan suddenly stopped walking. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I listened, but heard nothing unusual. "What did it sound like?" "Someone calling my name." Her eyes were wide, scanning the darkening forest. I felt that familiar prickle of unease return. "It's just the wind through the trees. Or maybe a bird call that sounded similar." She nodded but didn't look convinced. "Right, of course." We pressed on, but Megan grew increasingly agitated, constantly looking over her shoulder and jumping at every sound. Night was falling rapidly now, and I was forced to use my flashlight to see the trail. The beam seemed feeble against the pressing darkness. "We should make camp," I finally suggested. "It's too dangerous to keep hiking at night even on a marked trail." "No." Megan's response was immediate and vehement. "We need to keep going. We're close." "Megan, you're exhausted. I'm exhausted. We could miss a turn or twist an ankle." She whirled on me, her face contorted with fear or anger. I couldn't tell which. "They'll find us if we stop." "Who will find us?" I asked, truly alarmed now. Her eyes darted around frantically. "The people from the mine, the ones who keep calling my name." I gripped her shoulders. "Meg, listen to me. There's no one calling you. There's no one following us. You're exhausted and your mind is playing tricks on you." For a moment, she seemed to come back to herself. "You're right, I'm just tired. But please, Laura, let's keep going. I don't want to sleep out here again." I reluctantly agreed, and we continued our slow progress along the trail. The night closed in around us, the forest transforming into a labyrinth of shadows where every tree looked menacing and every sound seemed amplified. After what felt like an eternity, we spotted lights through the trees. The ranger station. Relief flooded through me so intensely I could have cried. "We made it," I said, turning to Megan with a smile. But Megan wasn't looking at the lights. She was staring back the way we'd come, her face drained of all color. "They followed us," she whispered. I followed her gaze but saw nothing except darkness. "There's no one there, Meg." "You don't see them? Standing just at the edge of the light?" A chill ran down my spine. "Let's get to the ranger station. Now." I took her hand and practically dragged her the remaining distance to the station. The small building was a beacon of normality after our harrowing experience in the forest. Light spilled from its windows and I could see movement inside. People, civilization. Ranger Dawson was still on duty, his weathered face registering surprise and then concern when we burst through the door. "You two look like you've seen a ghost," he remarked, rising from his desk. "We got lost," I explained breathlessly. "Ended up in that area you warned us about. The hollows." Something like fear flickered across his face before he composed himself. "Well, you're lucky you found your way out. Not everyone does." Those words struck me as odd, but I was too relieved to be back in civilization to question them. "Is there somewhere we can stay tonight? We'll head back to our car in the morning." He nodded. "There's a bunkhouse for hikers behind the station. Not fancy, but it's got heat and running water." "Thank you," I said, nearly weeping with gratitude. As Ranger Dawson showed us to the bunkhouse, I noticed Megan was still distracted, her eyes constantly darting to the tree line as if expecting something to emerge from the darkness. The bunkhouse was basic but clean, with 6 bunk beds and a small bathroom. We were the only occupants that night, which suited me fine. After quick, lukewarm showers that felt like absolute heaven, we settled into our bunks. "Try to get some sleep," I told Megan. "We're safe now." She nodded, but I could tell from her rigid posture that sleep was far from her mind. "Laura, thank you for not leaving me out there." The odd phrasing disturbed me. Of course I wouldn't leave you. We were in it together. She turned to face the wall without responding. Despite my exhaustion, sleep eluded me for hours. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the blighted trees of the hollows and the yawning entrance to the mine. Around 2 a.m., I finally drifted off. I dreamed of digging again. In this dream, I was in the mine, clawing at a wall of coal with bloody fingers, trying to reach something, or someone, trapped on the other side. I could hear children crying, their voices muffled by the layers of earth between us. "Help us," they pleaded. "Don't leave us in the dark." I woke with a strangled gasp. The bunkhouse was dark and quiet. The only sound, the gentle hum of the heating system. I reached for my phone to check the time. 3:27 a.m., exactly the same time I'd awakened the previous night. With a growing sense of dread, I turned to Megan's bunk. Empty. "Not again," I muttered, fumbling for my flashlight. I checked the bathroom, also empty. She must have gone outside. Pulling on my jacket and boots, I rushed out of the bunkhouse. The night air was bitterly cold, my breath forming clouds in front of my face. The ranger station's exterior lights created pools of harsh illumination surrounded by impenetrable darkness. "Megan," I called, my voice sounding small against the vastness of the night. No response. I circled the bunkhouse, then the main ranger station. No sign of her. The forest loomed at the edge of the light, a wall of blackness that seemed to breathe. A movement caught my eye. A pale figure at the tree line, moving away from the station. "Megan!" I shouted, breaking into a run. She was heading back toward the trail we'd emerged from just hours earlier, back toward the hollows. Like the night before, she was in her pajamas, barefoot despite the freezing ground. I caught up to her at the trail entrance, grabbing her arm. "Megan, stop! Where are you going?" She turned to me with that same vacant expression I'd seen the previous night, but this time, when she spoke, her voice was different. Higher, childlike. "They're waiting for me. I promised I'd come back." "Who's waiting for you?" I asked, trying to keep the panic from my voice. "The children in the mine. They're so lonely." I shook her gently. "Megan, wake up. You're sleepwalking again." Her eyes remained unfocused. They died in the dark, a century ago. The collapse trapped them. No one came to dig them out. A sick feeling settled in my stomach. I'd read somewhere that the Appalachian coal mines had claimed countless lives over the years, including those of children who work the narrow seams adults couldn't access. But how would Megan know such specific details? "Let's go back to the bunkhouse," I urged, tugging her arm. "It's freezing out here." She resisted with surprising strength. "I have to go back, I promised." "You don't owe anything to whatever's out there," I insisted. Her expression changed, hardening into something that looked nothing like my friend. "They chose me. I heard them calling. They showed me how lonely they've been, waiting all these years for someone to find them. That thing is not your friend, Megan. It's using you." Her laugh was chilling, a high, childish giggle that didn't belong to her. "They just want me to play with them, forever and ever." I heard a sound from behind me, the ranger station door opening. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness as Ranger Dawson and another man emerged. "Everything all right out here?" Dawson called, approaching cautiously. "My friend is sleepwalking," I explained, still holding Megan's arm. "She's trying to go back to the trail." The rangers exchanged a look I couldn't interpret. Dawson's companion, a younger man with a hard set to his jaw, murmured something I couldn't hear. "Let's get her inside," Dawson said, moving to Megan's other side. "It's not safe out here at night." Between the three of us, we managed to guide the still resistant Megan back to the bunkhouse. Once inside, she collapsed onto her bunk, instantly falling into what appeared to be normal sleep. The younger ranger left, but Dawson lingered, his expression troubled. "Has she done this before?" he asked quietly. "Just last night when we were camping. She got up and wandered outside. I found her standing in the dark, just staring." He nodded grimly. You were in the hollows yesterday, you said? Yes. We got lost and ended up following an old mining road through a valley. We passed an abandoned mine entrance. Dawson sighed heavily, suddenly looking much older. That would be the old Holloway mine. Bad business. What happened there? What did happen? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. He hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Sit down. There are things you should know, especially if your friend was affected by that place. I perched on the edge of my bunk, keeping one eye on Megan's sleeping form. In 1891, there was a collapse at the Holloway mine, Dawson began, his voice low. Buried 27 miners alive, including 8 children as young as 7 years old. The company claimed it would be too expensive to dig them out, so they sealed the entrance and abandoned the site. My dream of digging suddenly took on a horrifying new context. Local legend says the children never left, he continued, that they wander the hollows looking for someone to play with, someone to join them in the dark. You don't actually believe that, I said, though the events of the past 2 days made me less certain than I sounded. Dawson's weathered face was solemn. What I believe doesn't matter, but every few years, hikers go missing in that area. Sometimes they're found wandering, talking nonsense about children calling them. Sometimes they're never found at all. I swallowed hard. And you just let people hike there? It's public land. We warn folks to stay on the marked trails, circle the hollows on their maps. Most people listen. He glanced at Megan. But some are more susceptible than others. Susceptible to what? To the call. He stood, adjusting his hat. Your friend heard it. That's why she keeps trying to go back. That's ridiculous, I protested, though Megan's behavior suggested otherwise. Maybe so, he conceded. But I'd get her out of here first thing in the morning if I were you. Back to the city, far away from the hollows. And don't let her out of your sight tonight. After Dawson left, I sat awake watching Megan sleep. Her rest was uneasy, punctuated by murmurs and twitches. Occasionally, her lips moved as if in conversation with someone I couldn't see. I must have dozed off eventually, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through the bunkhouse windows and Megan was sitting on the edge of her bed, fully dressed and looking remarkably normal. Morning, sleepyhead, she greeted me with a smile. The Rangers have coffee brewing in the main building. I blinked, disoriented by her apparent recovery. How are you feeling? Much better after a real shower and a night in an actual bed. Ready to head back to the car and put this wilderness adventure behind us. Her tone was light, her expression clear. No sign of the vacant-eyed woman who had tried to return to the mine in the middle of the night. You don't remember getting up last night? I asked cautiously. Her smile faltered. Did I sleepwalk again? You tried to go back to the trail, said something about promises to children. She laughed, but it sounded forced. That's crazy. I don't remember any of that. I studied her carefully. She seemed like herself, and yet there was something slightly off about her cheerfulness, an artificial quality that hadn't been there before. Well, I agree we should get back to the car and head home, I said. The Rangers can point us to the shortest route. After a quick breakfast of instant oatmeal and surprisingly decent coffee, we thanked Ranger Dawson and got directions to where we'd left our car. It would be a 4-mile hike along the main trail, easy walking compared to our ordeal in the hollows. As we shouldered our packs, Dawson took me aside while Megan was adjusting her boots. Remember what I said, he murmured. Don't stop until you're well away from here, and keep an eye on her. I nodded my understanding. The hike back to our car was uneventful. Megan chattered about mundane things, work, mutual friends, a movie she wanted to see. Her normal demeanor was such a stark contrast to the hollow-eyed sleepwalker of the previous night that I began to doubt my own memory of events. Maybe the stress and exhaustion had made me imagine things darker than they really were. But then I'd remember the mine entrance, the unnatural stillness of the hollows, and that childish voice speaking through my friend's lips. They chose me. We reached the car around noon, both of us visibly relieved to see the metallic blue Honda still waiting in the small gravel parking area. "Civilization, at last," Megan said, throwing her backpack into the trunk with perhaps more force than necessary. "Next time I suggest a nature retreat, remind me that hotels exist." I laughed, the sound almost jarring after the tension of the past 2 days. Agreed, though I think we learned something about ourselves out there. What? That we're not cut out for wilderness survival? She slid into the passenger seat, immediately fiddling with the radio. "That too," I said, starting the engine. "But also that we're stronger than we think. We got lost in one of the most dangerous parts of the forest and still found our way out." Megan's smile faltered for just a moment. "Right. Go us." The drive back to Philadelphia was long but cathartic, the miles of asphalt putting needed distance between us and the Appalachian wilderness. We stopped once for lunch at a roadside diner, where we both ordered the greasiest burgers on the menu, a celebration of our return to civilization. "So," I said between bites, "tell me more about this sleepwalking thing. You really don't remember any of it?" Megan pushed a French fry around her plate. "Not really. I remember dreams, I guess, about children playing. They wanted me to join them." She shrugged, attempting nonchalance. "Stress dreams, obviously, probably triggered by getting lost." "Probably," I agreed, though I wasn't convinced. "Just never knew you to sleepwalk before." "First time for everything," she echoed my words from the first night. "Can we talk about something else? I just want to forget the whole experience." I dropped the subject, and we spent the rest of the drive listening to 90s pop hits and making plans for a proper spa weekend to make up for our disastrous camping trip. When I finally pulled up in front of Megan's Center City apartment, dusk was settling over Philadelphia. The city lights were coming on, and the sidewalks were filled with people heading to dinner or evening events, a far cry from the isolated forest we'd left behind. "Home, sweet home," I said, putting the car in park. "You going to be okay? I can come up for a bit if you want company." Megan smiled, gathering her things. "I'm fine, really. Just need a long shower and about 12 hours of sleep in my own bed." She hesitated, then added, "Thanks for not leaving me out there." There it was again, that strange phrasing, as if I'd been tempted to abandon her. "Of course, that's what friends do." She leaned over and gave me a quick hug, then got out of the car. I watched until she disappeared into her building before driving the remaining few blocks to my own apartment. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in days, with no dreams of digging or lost children. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, a perfect fall Saturday that made the events in the Monongahela forest seem like a distant nightmare. I spent the day correcting papers from my freshman composition class and trying not to think about mines or hollow-eyed friends. Around 4 p.m., I texted Megan to check in. "Recovered yet? Thinking of ordering Thai tonight if you want to join." No response. By 8 p.m., with still no word from Megan, I began to worry. I called her cell, straight to voicemail. I told myself she was probably sleeping, or her phone had died. But a nagging sense of wrongness persisted. At 9 p.m., I gave in to my anxiety and drove to her apartment. The lights were off and repeated knocking yielded no response. I used the spare key she'd given me years ago for emergencies. "Megan," I called, stepping into the darkened apartment. "It's Laura. Are you here?" No answer. The apartment was cold and felt uninhabited, though her backpack from our trip lay just inside the door where she'd dropped it. A quick search confirmed my fears. Megan wasn't there. Her phone and wallet were gone, but otherwise there was no indication of where she might have gone. On her nightstand, I noticed a crumpled piece of paper, a receipt from a Greyhound bus station, dated that morning, a ticket to Cumberland, Maryland. My blood ran cold. Cumberland was the nearest major town to the Monongahela National Forest. She'd gone back. I tried calling her again. Voicemail. I left a frantic message. "Megan, I'm at your apartment. I found the bus receipt. Please call me and tell me you're not going back to that forest. Please." Next, I called the ranger station, somehow remembering the number from their brochure. After several rings, Ranger Dawson answered. Monongahela Ranger Station, Dawson speaking. "This is Laura Adams," I said, my words tumbling out in a rush. "My friend and I were lost in your forest a couple days ago. We passed through an area called the Hollows." "I remember you," he cut in, his voice grave. "My friend's gone. I think she's coming back there. She bought a bus ticket to Cumberland this morning." A long silence followed, broken only by what sounded like Dawson exhaling heavily. When would that bus have arrived? I checked the receipt again. Around 2 p.m. Another pause. "And it's just past 9 now." He seemed to be talking more to himself than to me. "If she hired a car in Cumberland right away, she could be at the trailhead by now." "You have to stop her," I pleaded. "She's not in her right mind. That place did something to her." "Miss Adams," he said carefully, "I'll send someone to check the trails, but you need to understand, if she's determined to go back to the Hollows, she'll find a way. They always do, once they've been called." "What do you mean, they always do? How many people has this happened to?" He didn't answer my question directly. "The best thing you can do is come back here yourself. If anyone can reach her, it's you. You might be the only connection strong enough to break the hold that place has on her." "I'm 6 hours away," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "Then I suggest you start driving. Now." I didn't hesitate. Within 20 minutes I was on the road, my car pointed west toward the Appalachians. As the lights of Philadelphia faded behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was driving directly into a nightmare. The drive was a blur of dark highways and caffeine, my mind racing with terrifying possibilities. What if I couldn't find Megan? What if I found her, but she was already changed? What if the Hollows claimed us both? I arrived at the Monongahela Ranger Station just after 3 a.m. The light was on, and Ranger Dawson was waiting, looking like he hadn't slept. "Any sign of her?" I asked as I climbed out of my car on shaky legs. He shook his head grimly. "We checked the main trailheads and campsites. Nothing yet. So what do we do? Wait until daylight?" "That would be the sensible thing," he agreed. "But I don't think she's taking the marked trails. I think she's going straight for the Hollows, and there's only one direct route this time of night, the old mining access road." I felt sick at the thought of that blighted valley in darkness. "Then we need to go now." Dawson studied me for a moment. "You really care about your friend?" "She's like family," I said simply. He nodded, coming to a decision. "Let me get some gear." 20 minutes later, we were in his ranger truck, bouncing along a rutted service road that seemed barely passable. The truck's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating trees that seemed to lean in toward us. "This road will get us close to the south end of the Hollows," Dawson explained. "It's not maintained, but it's faster than hiking in on foot." "How do you know she went this way?" I asked. He glanced at me sideways. "Because the Holloway mine is pulling her in, and this is the most direct route." I wanted to argue with his superstitious explanation, but after what I'd seen, I couldn't. Why is this happening? Why Megan? Dawson kept his eyes on the treacherous road. "Some people are more sensitive to such things, more open to influence. Has your friend experienced trauma recently? Loss? A major life change?" I thought of Megan's divorce, the emotional abuse she'd endured from Tyler. "Yes, her ex-husband. It was a bad situation." "That would do it," he nodded. "Creates a vulnerability, a door that can be opened." We lapsed into silence as the truck continued its slow progress along the service road. After about 40 minutes, Dawson brought the vehicle to a stop. "This is as far as we can drive. From here, we walk." The night air was bitterly cold as we stepped out of the truck. Dawson handed me a heavy-duty flashlight and what looked like a mining helmet with a lamp attached. "Put this on," he instructed. "Keeps your hands free and provides better visibility." As I adjusted the helmet, a distant sound drifted through the trees, that same keening wail we'd heard in the forest. "What is that?" I whispered. Dawson's face was grim in the harsh light of our lamps. "The call," he said simply. "They're excited. Someone's coming to join them." We set off into the forest, following a narrow, overgrown path that I never would have identified as a trail without Dawson's guidance. The trees here were sickly, with the same blighted appearance I remembered from the hollows. "How much farther?" I asked after about 20 minutes of tense hiking. "Not far. We're already on the edge of the hollows. The mine entrance is about half a mile ahead." The air grew colder as we progressed, with a dank, earthy smell that reminded me of a cellar after heavy rain. Our breath formed clouds in front of our faces. I noticed that the normal sounds of the forest, insects, birds, the rustle of small animals, had completely ceased. The only sound was our footsteps and that distant, haunting wail that seemed to be getting louder. "When we find her," Dawson said quietly, "don't expect her to come willingly. She won't be entirely herself." "What do you mean?" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "The children from the mine, or whatever's left of them, they don't understand that they're dead. They just know they're lonely. They want playmates, and they're persistent. So what do we do? Remind her who she is. Remind her of her connections to the living world. It might be enough to break their hold." "And if it isn't?" I asked, dreading the answer. Dawson didn't respond. We came to the edge of a clearing and I recognized it immediately. The mine entrance. In the harsh light of our headlamps, it looked even more ominous than it had in daylight, a black maw in the hillside that seemed to devour light. And there, standing at the entrance, was Megan. She wasn't alone. Surrounding her were what I at first took to be children, small, pale figures in ragged clothing, but as my light passed over them, I realized with horror that they weren't fully substantial. They flickered and wavered like reflections in disturbed water, their features blurred except for their eyes, dark, hollow pits that seemed to absorb the light. Megan stood among them, one hand extended toward the darkness of the mine entrance. She was smiling. "Megan," I called, my voice cracking with fear. She turned, and I saw that her eyes had changed. They were dark and empty, like those of the spectral children. "Laura," she said, her voice that same childish tone I'd heard at the ranger station. "You came to play, too." "Careful," Dawson warned. "Don't go any closer yet." The ghostly children had turned their attention to us, their insubstantial forms drifting closer. I could hear whispering now, a chorus of small voices too faint to make out individual words. "Megan, you need to come away from there," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This isn't right. You know this isn't right." Her smile faltered slightly. "But they're so lonely, Laura. They've been alone in the dark for so long. They just want friends." "They're dead, Megan," I said bluntly. "They've been dead for over 100 years. Whatever those things are, they're not children anymore." The whispering grew louder, angry now. The spectral forms moved between Megan and us, as if to block our access. "Don't listen to her," one of them said, its voice like dry leaves rustling. "She wants to take you away. Back to the pain." "Back to him," another added. Megan flinched at that. I realized they were talking about Tyler, using her trauma against her. "Megan, listen to me," I said, taking a step forward despite Dawson's restraining hand. "Remember why we went on this trip? To celebrate 15 years of friendship. 15 years of being there for each other through everything." I took another step. "Remember when we were sophomores and your mom got sick? Who sat with you in the hospital every night for a week?" A flicker of recognition crossed her face. "You did." "And when Tyler started showing his true colors, who helped you move out while he was on that business trip?" "You did," she repeated, her voice sounding more like her own. The spectral children were agitated now, moving frantically between us, their whispers rising to hisses. "Don't listen. She'll leave you just like everyone else. Stay with us forever." I kept walking forward, ignoring the growing cold as I passed through their insubstantial forms. Tyler tried to convince you that you were nothing without him. These things are doing the same thing. They're manipulating you, Meg." I was close enough now to see tears forming in her eyes, momentarily clearing the darkness there. "I can't leave them," she whispered. "They need me." "I need you," I countered. "Your students need you. Your parents, your sister, all the friends who love you. We need you." I reached out my hand. "Please, Meg, come home." The mine entrance behind her seemed to darken further, as if gathering itself. The air crackled with a palpable malevolence. The spectral children were screaming now, their voices like wind through broken glass. "You promised!" they shrieked. "You promised to stay!" Megan's face contorted with confusion and pain. She looked from me to the mine entrance and back again, clearly torn. "I did promise," she murmured. "You made that promise under duress," I insisted, "to things that tricked you, that used your compassion against you." "They're just children," she protested weakly. "Look at them, Meg. Really look." She turned to the spectral forms surrounding her, and for the first time, seemed to truly see them. Not as the lonely children they presented themselves as, but as the hollow, hungry things they'd become over a century of darkness and rage. "Oh, God," she whispered. "Take my hand," I urged. "Right now." She reached out, our fingers almost touching when a violent gust of wind erupted from the mine entrance, knocking us both backward. The spectral children swarmed around Megan, their forms elongating into something less human, more predatory. "She is ours." The voice that emerged from the collective was deep and resonant, nothing like a child's. Dawson was beside me now, helping me to my feet. "The entity from the mine," he muttered. "It's showing its true nature." The swarm of spectral forms had enveloped Megan completely now. I could barely see her within their churning mass, just glimpses of her terrified face. "What do we do?" I cried. Dawson pulled something from his jacket, a small cloth bag that he tossed directly into the swarm. It burst on impact, releasing a cloud of what looked like rust-colored dust. "Iron filings," he explained. "Old mining superstition. Weakened spirits tied to the earth." The effect was immediate. The swarm recoiled, the spectral forms dissipating like smoke in wind. Megan collapsed to the ground, suddenly free of their grip. I rushed to her side, lifting her semi-conscious form. "Meg, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, normal eyes, tired and afraid, but her own. "Laura? I'm here. We're getting you out of this place." The mine entrance behind us emitted a deafening howl of rage. The ground began to tremble. "Run," Dawson ordered. "Now." Supporting Megan between us, we fled from the clearing as the tremors intensified. Behind us, I heard the sound of collapsing rock and earth, the mine entrance caving in on itself in a final paroxysm of thwarted rage. We didn't stop running until we reached Dawson's truck, half carrying Megan the entire way. She was weak but conscious, her eyes clear of that terrible emptiness. The drive back to the ranger station was silent, all of us too exhausted and shaken for conversation. Once there, Dawson insisted on checking Megan for injuries and signs of hypothermia. "Physically, she seems okay," he concluded, "but she should see a doctor when you get back to the city, and maybe a therapist." Megan, wrapped in a thermal blanket and clutching a mug of hot tea, nodded meekly. "Will she be normal again?" I asked quietly while Megan was in the bathroom. Dawson's weathered face was solemn. "Hard to say. The influence of that place, it leaves a mark, but having you nearby will help. You're her anchor to this world." When Megan emerged, looking marginally better after washing her face, Dawson spoke to both of us. "You should leave as soon as possible. Put as much distance between yourselves and the hollows as you can. Trust me, we won't be coming back," I assured him. Dawn was breaking as Megan and I got into my car to begin the long drive back to Philadelphia. The eastern sky was lightening to a pale gold, the darkness receding. For the first hour, we drove in silence. Megan stared out the window, her expression unreadable. Finally, as we crossed the state line into Maryland, she spoke. "I heard them in Philadelphia," she said quietly. "That's why I came back. They were calling me, day and night." I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "And now?" She turned to look at me, and I was relieved to see only my friend in her eyes. Tired and traumatized, but herself. "Silence," she said. "Just blessed silence." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "Let's keep it that way." 3 weeks have passed since our return from the Appalachians. On the surface, life has returned to normal. Megan is back at work, teaching high school English. I'm grading papers and planning next semester's courses. We meet for coffee, see movies, text about mundane things. But there are changes, subtle ones. Megan startles at sudden darkness. She keeps lights on in every room. Sometimes in mid-conversation, her eyes will drift to a point over my shoulder, as if listening for something I can't hear. She's seeing a therapist, which helps. We never talk about what happened at the mine, not directly, though it hangs between us like an invisible thread. I've done research since our return. The Holloway mine disaster was real. 27 miners, including 8 children, buried alive in 1891 when the company deemed rescue efforts economically unfeasible. The mine was sealed and abandoned. The dead left where they fell. Over the decades, dozens of hikers and campers have gone missing in that area. Some were found wandering, disoriented, and talking about children calling to them. Others were never found at all. Last night I woke at exactly 3:27 a.m., the room cold despite my closed windows. For a moment I thought I heard a faint, distant keening, that same horrible wail from the forest. But it was just the wind, surely. Just the wind through the city streets. I called Megan immediately, despite the hour. She answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting for my call. "Did you hear it?" she asked without preamble. My blood ran cold. "Hear what?" A long pause. "Nothing. It was nothing. Just a bad dream." "Meg," I said carefully, "if you ever hear them again—" "I know," she cut me off. "I'll tell you right away. I promise." Her voice softened. "And Laura? Thank you for not leaving me in the dark." We've booked a vacation for next month, a resort in Florida, as far from mountains and forests as we can get. All light and open spaces. No shadows for things to hide in. I tell myself we're safe now, that the distance is enough, that whatever lurks in the hollows can't reach us here. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I still dream of digging, and sometimes I swear I hear children laughing, just at the edge of hearing. And Megan. Sometimes when she thinks I'm not looking, she turns toward the west, toward the distant mountains with an expression I cannot name, but that fills me with dread. I don't know if we truly escaped, or if we just bought some time. All I know is that I won't let my friend go back into the dark, not ever again, because the children from the mine are patient. They've waited over a century already, and they haven't forgotten her promise. Whispers in Blackwater Gorge. My name is Jacob Carter, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the most remote section of the Appalachian Mountains, in a place locals call Blackwater Gorge, West Virginia. I've always been drawn to solitude, to the quiet spaces where civilization's endless noise fades away. That's why, after my divorce and the subsequent burnout from my marketing job in Pittsburgh, I decided to try something radical. A 2-week solo hiking expedition along the lesser-known trails of the Appalachians. I should have listened to the gas station attendant in the tiny town of Whitecrest. His gnarled fingers trembled slightly as he handed me my change. "You heading up to Blackwater?" he asked, eyes darting to my backpack and hiking boots. "Yeah, planning to camp there for a few nights. Heard it's beautiful." He hesitated, weathered face creasing with concern. "Stick to the marked trails, son. People who wander off tend to find things they ain't looking for." I smiled politely, chalking it up to small-town superstition. Another customer entered, and our conversation ended there. I wish now I'd asked what he meant. The first 2 days on the trail were exactly what I needed. The late September air carried just enough chill to make the hike invigorating without being uncomfortable. The forest was a kaleidoscope of early autumn colors: burnished golds, fiery oranges, and stubborn greens clinging to the last vestiges of summer. I set up camp the second night near Pinewood Creek, a spot not on any official maps but mentioned in an obscure hiking forum online as having the most spectacular sunrise views. That night, I heard the whispers for the first time. It started as the wind, or what I convinced myself was the wind, a soft rustling through the canopy above. But as darkness fully claimed the forest, the sounds became more directed, coherent, almost like conversations held just at the edge of hearing. I told myself it was just water over rocks, branches creaking, the normal symphony of forest sounds distorted by unfamiliar terrain and my isolation. The third day dawned misty and unusually warm. I packed up camp and continued northeast, planning to reach Blackwater Gorge proper by mid-afternoon. The trail gradually narrowed, becoming less defined. Several times I had to consult my GPS to confirm I was still on track. Around noon, I noticed my cell signal was completely gone, despite having had at least one bar the previous day. The GPS still worked, thankfully, but something about being so completely cut off from the outside world sent a chill up my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was around 2 p.m. when I first noticed I was being followed. The sensation came gradually, a prickling awareness at the back of my neck, the feeling of eyes tracking my movements. Twice I spun around expecting to see another hiker or perhaps a deer. Nothing, just the endless trees, their trunks disappearing into the increasingly thick mist. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and insignificant among the ancient oaks. No response, just the soft dripping of moisture from leaves and that persistent, maddening whisper that seemed to dance around the edges of the forest. I pushed on, telling myself I was experiencing the normal paranoia of someone unaccustomed to true solitude. By late afternoon, I reached what my map identified as the entrance to Blackwater Gorge. A crude wooden sign, weathered by countless seasons, marked the trail. Something had been carved below the official text, recent carvings, the wood still pale where it had been cut. "Eliza waits within." I stared at the carving, a new unease settling in my stomach. Eliza? Was that a local reference? A joke left by another hiker? I took a photo, though some irrational part of me was reluctant to document the strange message. The gorge trail descended steeply, switchbacking down into a ravine where sunlight struggled to penetrate the thick canopy. The temperature dropped noticeably with each turn of the path. The mist thickened into a light fog that swirled around my ankles as I walked, giving the unnerving impression that the ground itself was moving beneath me. I found a relatively flat clearing to make camp as dusk approached. Despite the growing knot of anxiety in my chest, I had to admit the spot was beautiful. A small, natural platform overlooking the deeper sections of the gorge, with a tiny stream bubbling nearby. I set up my tent, gathered wood for a fire, and tried to shake the persistent feeling that someone, or something, was watching me from the tree line. The fire refused to catch properly. The wood, though it appeared dry, smoldered and smoked but wouldn't sustain a flame. After 30 minutes of frustrating attempts, I managed to create a meager blaze that cast weak, flickering shadows across my campsite. I heated my dinner over the struggling flames, the freeze-dried meal tasting like ash in my mouth. That night, the whispers grew louder. They pulled me from a fitful sleep around 3 a.m., according to my watch. This time, there was no mistaking them for natural sounds. They were voices, multiple voices, having a murmured conversation just outside my tent. I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, heart pounding so loudly I was certain whoever was out there must hear it. not like the others. Eliza will want this one. Time is wrong yet. Patience, sister, patience. The voices were feminine, with an odd, archaic cadence that reminded me of the historical reenactors I'd seen at Colonial Williamsburg as a child. I wanted to believe I was dreaming, but the cold sweat soaking my t-shirt and the painful clarity of my fear told me otherwise. With trembling hands, I reached for my flashlight and the small hunting knife I'd brought along. The voices immediately ceased. I waited, barely breathing, for several minutes. Nothing. Just the normal sounds of the forest at night. Finally, gathering what courage I could muster, I unzipped the tent and shone my light into the darkness. The beam cut through the mist, illuminating nothing but trees and undergrowth. My campfire had died completely, not even embers remaining, though I was certain I'd added enough wood to last until morning. I stepped fully outside, swinging my light in a slow arc around the perimeter of my camp. Nothing seemed disturbed. No footprints in the soft earth besides my own. I was about to return to my tent when my light caught something hanging from a nearby branch. A small burlap pouch suspended by a leather cord. I was absolutely certain it hadn't been there earlier. Common sense told me not to touch it. Everything I'd ever learned from horror movies screamed at me to leave it alone. But curiosity, that fatal human flaw, drove me forward. The pouch was roughly sewn about the size of my palm. It smelled of unfamiliar herbs and something metallic, like old pennies. Blood, my mind supplied unwelcomely. With reluctant fingers, I untied the crude knot holding it closed. Inside was a lock of dark hair tied with thread, 3 small bones I desperately hoped belonged to an animal, and a folded scrap of yellowed paper. My hands shook as I unfolded the paper. By the beam of my flashlight, I made out a single line of text written in an elegant, antique script. "We see you, Jacob Carter. Eliza sees you." The paper fluttered from my nerveless fingers. How could anyone know my name? I'd told no one in Whitecrest, had spoken to no other hikers. My pack had been with me constantly. No one could have gone through my ID. I stumbled back to my tent, zipped myself inside as if the thin nylon could offer any protection, and lay awake until dawn, knife clutched in my white-knuckled grip. As first light filtered through the trees, I packed up camp with shaking hands, determined to hike back to civilization and forget the entire experience. But when I tried to retrace my steps up the switchback trail, I couldn't find it. Where the clear path had been the previous day, there was now only dense underbrush and fallen logs. I checked my GPS, which showed I was directly on the trail, but my eyes told me otherwise. I spent an hour searching for any sign of the path before accepting the impossible truth. The trail was gone. My only option was to continue forward, deeper into the gorge, and hope to find another way out. According to my map, the gorge trail eventually connected with Holloway Ridge Road, about 7 miles ahead. If I kept moving, I could reach it by nightfall. The day became a waking nightmare of disorientation and growing dread. The mist never lifted, reducing visibility to mere yards in any direction. The GPS began to glitch, showing me in locations that couldn't possibly be correct, sometimes miles from where I'd been moments before, sometimes in the middle of nearby Boone Lake, which I knew was at least 20 miles away. Twice I heard laughter echoing through the trees. High, feminine laughter with an edge of cruelty that made my skin crawl. Each time I shouted, demanding to know who was there. Each time, silence was my only answer. Around midday, I found the doll. It hung from a low branch directly in my path, impossible to miss or dismiss as something natural. About a foot tall, it was crafted from twigs and corn husks in a crude human shape. Where its face should have been, someone had sewn a scrap of fabric with my features drawn in what looked disturbingly like dried blood, a childish but recognizable portrait. Below the doll, arranged carefully on a flat rock, was my wallet. The wallet that had been in my front pocket since I'd started hiking. I frantically patted my pocket, finding it empty. With mounting horror, I picked up the wallet and opened it. Everything was there, credit cards, driver's license, the $83 in cash, except for the small photo of my ex-wife that I still carried out of some misplaced sentimentality. In its place was another yellowed note. "She wasn't right for you, Jacob. Eliza understands you better. I couldn't rationalize this. Couldn't explain how someone had picked my pocket without my knowledge, created this doll, left this note. The implications were too disturbing, too impossible to accept. I ran. Blind panic propelled me forward, crashing through underbrush, vaulting fallen logs. My only thought to put distance between myself and the doll, the notes, the whispers. I don't know how long I ran before my foot caught on an exposed root, sending me sprawling face first into the damp earth. Pain exploded in my ankle as I tried to stand, and I knew immediately I'd sprained it badly. I dragged myself to the base of a large oak, fighting to control my breathing and the waves of terror threatening to overwhelm me. I needed to think clearly. Needed a plan. I still had water, food, my first aid kit. I wrapped my ankle as best I could and used a sturdy branch as a makeshift walking stick. I had to keep moving, had to find that road. The afternoon waned, shadows lengthening as I limped through the increasingly unfamiliar terrain. The gorge deepened, the walls rising steeply on either side, hemming me in. The stream I'd been loosely following widened into a slow-moving river, its black waters seeming to absorb rather than reflect the fading light. And then I saw the cabin. It stood in a small clearing ahead, a crude structure of weathered logs and a stone chimney from which thin smoke curled into the mist. A single window glowed with warm, yellow light. Under normal circumstances, the sight would have been welcome. Shelter, possibly help for my injured ankle, maybe even a phone. But after the events of the past 24 hours, the cabin filled me with inexplicable dread. Yet night was falling, my ankle throbbed mercilessly, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. I had little choice. I approached cautiously, keeping to the edge of the clearing, watching for any movement. When I was about 20 yards from the cabin, the door creaked open. A figure stepped onto the small porch, a woman in a long dark dress that looked like something from another century. Even in the fading light, I could see she was beautiful in a severe, unsettling way. Pale skin, dark hair pulled back from a high forehead, full lips set in a solemn line. "You're late, Jacob," she called, her voice carrying clearly across the clearing. "I've been waiting ever so long." Ice formed in my veins. "Who are you?" I managed to call back, though I already knew the answer. "Don't be silly," she smiled, the expression not reaching her dark eyes. "I'm Eliza Blackwater. This is my home, and you're hurt." She gestured to my ankle. "Please, come inside before the dark things find you." Dark things? What was she talking about? And yet, the whispers, the feeling of being watched, the doll. Maybe she wasn't the threat I should fear. I hesitated, trapped between competing terrors, the unknown menace in the gathering darkness versus this strange woman who somehow knew my name. In the end, pain and exhaustion made the decision for me. I limped toward the cabin, keeping my knife accessible in my pocket. The interior of the cabin was surprisingly cozy, a fire crackling in the stone hearth, simple wooden furniture arranged around a hand-woven rug, herbs hanging in bunches from the low beams. It looked like a museum exhibit of early American life, every detail perfect and yet somehow too perfect, as if assembled from a catalog of historical imagery rather than organically created. "Sit," Eliza said, gesturing to a chair near the fire. "Let me tend to your ankle." She moved with fluid grace, gathering supplies from various shelves and containers, a wooden bowl, strips of clean cloth, a jar of something pungent. I watched her warily, noticing details that deepened my unease. Her dress, which I'd initially taken for a conservative modern garment, was actually a period piece, the kind worn by women in the late 1700s. Her speech had the same archaic quality I'd heard in the whispered voices outside my tent. "What is this place?" I asked as she knelt before me and began unlacing my hiking boot with cool, efficient fingers. How do you know my name?" Eliza looked up, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "This is Blackwater Gorge, my family's land since before the Revolution. As for your name," she smiled again, that same empty expression. "The forest told me. The forest tells me many things." She removed my boot and sock with surprising gentleness, then examined my swollen ankle. "A bad sprain, but not broken. This will help." She dipped her fingers into the jar and began spreading a greenish salve over my skin. It burned at first, then went curiously numb. "You're not making sense," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Are you saying you live here, alone? There's no record of any residents in this part of the National Forest." Eliza laughed, the sound like water over stones. "Official records, maps, boundaries. These mean nothing here. This place exists, adjacent, to your world. We only allow certain travelers to find us. We, my sisters and I. You heard them last night. They've been watching you since you entered our woods." She finished binding my ankle with the cloth strips and sat back on her heels. "They thought you might be suitable. I had to see for myself. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature ran through me." "Suitable for what?" Instead of answering, she rose gracefully and moved to a small table where a teapot sat. "You must be thirsty. Have some tea." Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, but my mouth was dry with fear and the fire's heat. When she handed me the roughly made ceramic cup, I took it automatically. The liquid inside was amber-colored and smelled of unfamiliar spices. "Drink," she encouraged, sitting across from me. "It will help with the pain." I pretended to sip, keeping the liquid from actually touching my lips. "You haven't answered my question. Suitable for what?" Eliza's gaze was unnervingly direct. "For staying, Jacob. We need new blood now and then. The bloodlines grow thin otherwise." "Bloodlines?" My voice cracked on the word. "The Blackwater family has always been here, always will be here. But we need men from the outside sometimes. Men like you, alone, disconnected, searching for something they can't define." She leaned forward, her expression softening into something almost tender. "I can give you purpose, Jacob. Belonging. You won't have to return to that empty apartment, that meaningless job." My head swam with confusion and growing horror. How could she know about my apartment, my job? "How long have you been here?" I asked, stalling for time as I tried to process what was happening. "I was born in this cabin in 1794, she said matter-of-factly. "My sisters are older still." I laughed nervously. "That's impossible. You'd be over 230 years old." "Time moves differently here," she replied, unperturbed by my skepticism. "Surely you've noticed. Your watch hasn't advanced since you entered the gorge." With a spike of dread, I glanced at my watch. She was right. The digital display showed 3:47 p.m., the exact time I'd found the doll, hours earlier. I hadn't noticed in my panic and pain. "This isn't happening," I muttered, setting down the untouched tea. "I'm hallucinating. Or I hit my head when I fell." "Is your life so fulfilling that you can't imagine something beyond your understanding?" Eliza asked, her voice taking on a hypnotic quality. "You came to these mountains seeking escape. I'm offering you the ultimate escape, Jacob. No more loneliness. No more purposeless days." For a brief, insane moment, I felt myself considering her words. There was a persuasive power to her voice, a promise of relief from the emptiness that had driven me to this solo expedition in the first place. But then I remembered the whispers, the doll, the impossible changes to the landscape. "I need to use the bathroom," I said suddenly, grasping for an excuse to move, to think. Eliza pointed to a crude door at the back of the cabin. "Through there. Don't try the window. It's a long drop to the river below." The bathroom was little more than an outhouse attached to the main structure, a wooden seat over what I assumed was a pit, A small window indeed, looking out over a sheer drop to the black waters I'd seen earlier. No escape that way. I needed time to think, to plan. When I returned to the main room, Eliza was stirring something in a pot over the fire. "You didn't drink your tea," she observed without turning. That was unwise. It would have made things easier. Made what easier? My hand closed around the knife in my pocket. The transition, the letting go of your old life. She turned to face me, and in the shifting firelight her face seemed to change, becoming older, then younger, beautiful and terrible in rapid alternation. Few men manage it easily without help. I took a step back, bumping into the rough-hewn table. "I'm not staying here. I'm leaving at first light." "No one leaves Blackwater Gorge unless we allow it, Jacob. Surely you understand that by now." She moved toward me with that same fluid grace. "But don't worry. The resistance fades. They all come to love it here, eventually. To love me." The last word hung in the air between us, loaded with centuries of implication. How many men had she lured here? How many had stayed? "Where are they?" I demanded, drawing the knife now. "These other men?" Eliza's smile turned sad. "They serve their purpose, and then they return to the forest. Become part of it. Nothing is wasted here." I backed toward the door, knife extended before me. "Stay back. I'm leaving now." Into the darkness? With things far less human than I waiting among the trees? She shook her head. "The choice is simple. Jacob. Stay with me, join with me willingly, or my sisters will take you anyway. Your body, at least. Your mind will be unnecessary." My back hit the cabin door. With one hand I felt for the latch, keeping my eyes and knife trained on Eliza. She made no move to stop me, watching with that same sad smile. "They all run at first," she sighed. "I had hoped you might be different." The latch gave way, and I stumbled backward onto the porch. Night had fallen completely, the clearing now a pool of silver-blue moonlight breaking through the mist. And in that moonlight stood 3 figures, women in similar antiquated dresses, their faces obscured by the shadows of deep hoods. "My sisters," Eliza said from behind me. "They've come to help you decide." The hooded women began moving forward in perfect unison, gliding rather than walking across the clearing. As they approached, I caught glimpses of their faces beneath the hoods. Beautiful like Eliza, but wrong, somehow. Their features shifting and flowing like wax near a flame. Panic exploded in my chest. I half ran, half fell down the cabin steps and into the clearing, heading for the tree line opposite from where the sisters approached. My injured ankle screamed in protest, but adrenaline dulled the pain. Behind me, I heard Eliza call out, "It's no use, Jacob. The gorge keeps what the gorge claims." I plunged into the forest, the meager moonlight quickly swallowed by the canopy above. I activated my phone's flashlight, no longer caring if it drew attention. I needed to see, needed to find a path. Any path out of this nightmare. The whispers started again, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "Running only makes it worse. Should have taken her offer. Ours now, one way or another." I ran blindly, heedless of direction, my only thought to put distance between myself and the cabin, the sisters, the impossible horror of what Eliza had suggested. Branches whipped at my face, roots and rocks threatened to send me sprawling with each desperate step. After what felt like hours, I burst through the underbrush into another clearing, and froze in disbelief. The cabin stood before me, exactly as I'd left it, smoke still curling from the chimney, light still glowing in the window. "No," I gasped, turning to run in another direction. I made it perhaps 50 yards before a root caught my good foot, sending me crashing to the forest floor. The impact knocked the wind from my lungs and sent my phone flying from my grasp, its light briefly illuminating the forest before going dark. I lay there, struggling to breathe, to think. This couldn't be happening. Places didn't work this way. Time didn't work this way. I had to be hallucinating. Had to have eaten something toxic. Had to be experiencing some kind of psychotic break. When I could move again, I crawled toward where I thought my phone had landed. My hand closed around it, but when I tried to activate it, the screen remained dark. Dead, despite having been at 60% battery when I fled the cabin. A twig snapped nearby. I froze, listening intently. Another snap, closer this time. Then the whispers, right beside my ear. "Found you." I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the white-hot pain in my ankle, and lurched forward into the darkness. I made it 3 steps before colliding with something. Someone, standing directly in my path. Hands gripped my shoulders with impossible strength. "Enough running, Jacob," Eliza's voice murmured, her breath unnaturally cold against my face. "It's time to choose." "Let me go," I pleaded, struggling against her grip. "Please, I won't tell anyone about this place, about you." Her laugh was like ice cracking. "Of course you won't. No one would believe you, and those who might believe would never find us." Her hands moved to cup my face, her touch sending waves of numbness through my skin. "I'm offering you immortality, Jacob. A place in something eternal. Why do you resist?" "Because it's wrong," I managed to say through lips growing numb. "Whatever you are, whatever this is, it's wrong." "Wrong?" I could hear the frown in her voice, though I couldn't see her face in the darkness. "Survival is never wrong. We were here before your nation existed, before your kind brought their laws and boundaries and morality. We simply are, Jacob, as we have always been." Her hands moved to my chest, fingers spreading over my heart. Where she touched, I felt a creeping coldness, as if my blood was slowly turning to ice. "Last chance," she whispered. "Choose to stay willingly, and you retain your mind, yourself. Refuse, and my sisters take what we need anyway." In the darkness around us, I sensed movement. The other sisters closing in, their whispers a maddening chorus of anticipation. Whatever they planned to do to me, I knew with bone-deep certainty that it would be worse than anything I could imagine. My mind raced, searching desperately for options. Then I remembered the knife, still clutched in my right hand. In one fluid motion born of pure survival instinct, I brought it up and plunged it into what I hoped was Eliza's chest. There was no resistance, as if I'd stabbed empty air. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought I'd missed entirely. Then Eliza made a sound. Not a cry of pain, but a sound of surprise, almost disappointment. "Iron," she said softly. "Of course. So many forget the old protections." Her grip on me loosened. I pulled the knife free and slashed wildly in the darkness around me, hearing hisses of pain or anger as the blade occasionally met something solid. The whispers turned frantic, angry. "Hurts us. Take him now. No time for ceremony." A hand clawed at my back, ripping through my jacket and shirt, tearing into the skin beneath. Pain blazed across my shoulder blades. I spun and slashed again, connecting with something that felt like brittle branches rather than flesh. A shriek pierced the night, inhuman in its pitch and duration. I took advantage of the momentary confusion to run again, knife held before me like a talisman. I had no direction, no plan beyond escape. My ankle had gone from pain to a strange disconnected feeling, as if it no longer fully belonged to me. Behind me, I heard pursuit. Not the crashing of normal human movement through underbrush, but something smoother, faster, gaining on me with every second. My lungs burned, my vision narrowed to the few feet of forest floor illuminated by the occasional break in the canopy above. And then, miraculously, I saw light ahead. Not moonlight, but the steady, artificial glow of electric lighting. A road. It had to be a road. With my last reserves of strength, I pushed forward, bursting through the final line of trees onto a paved surface. Headlights approached from the left, a truck moving fast. I staggered into its path, waving my arms frantically. The driver slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a halt mere feet from where I stood swaying. An older man jumped out, his face a mask of concern. "Jesus Christ, buddy! I nearly hit you. Are you okay? You're bleeding." I looked down at myself in the headlight's glare. My clothes were torn, covered in dirt and leaves and what appeared to be thick, dark moss. Blood seeped from long scratches on my arms and what felt like a more serious wound on my back. The hunting knife was still clutched in my hand, its blade coated with a viscous black substance that was definitely not blood. "Hospital," I managed to croak. "Please." The man approached cautiously, eyeing the knife. "You want to put that down first, friend? Then I'll help you. What happened? Bear attack?" I lowered the knife, then let it fall to the asphalt. "Something like that." He helped me to the passenger side of his truck, his nose wrinkling at what I could only imagine was my horrific smell. "There's a medical center in Petersburg, about 40 minutes from here. You think you can hold on that long?" I nodded weakly, sinking into the seat. As he closed the door and rounded the truck to the driver's side, I looked back at the forest I'd emerged from. For just a moment, I thought I saw them. 3 hooded figures and Eliza in her antique dress, standing at the tree line, watching silently as the truck's engine roared to life. "What's your name, buddy?" the driver asked as he put the truck in gear. "Jacob," I responded automatically, still staring at the forest receding behind us. "Jacob Carter." "Well, Jacob, you're lucky I came along when I did. Not many people use this road at night, and fewer still would stop for a wild-looking guy with a knife." He glanced at me. "No offense." "What road is this?" I asked, my voice sounding distant and unfamiliar to my own ears. "Holloway Ridge Road. Runs along the eastern edge of the National Forest. Where'd you come from? Your car break down somewhere?" Holloway Ridge Road. The same road I'd been trying to reach, the one marked on my map as connecting to the Gorge Trail. I'd made it out. Somehow, I'd made it out. "I was hiking," I said, the simple truth seeming absurdly inadequate. "Got lost." The man nodded sagely. "Happens more than you'd think around here. The woods can play tricks on your mind, make you see things that aren't there, or things that shouldn't be there." I thought, but didn't say. We drove in silence for several minutes, the truck's heater slowly thawing my chilled body. Then, almost casually, the driver asked, "You didn't happen to run into a woman out there, did you? Dark hair, old-fashioned looking?" My blood turned to ice. I studied his profile in the dim glow of the dashboard lights, an ordinary face, weathered by age and outdoor work. Just a local man, asking a seemingly innocent question. "No," I lied. "No one." He nodded again, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Good, that's good." After a pause, he added, "The folks who see Eliza Blackwater don't usually make it out of those woods." We didn't speak again for the remainder of the drive. At the medical center, he helped me inside, explained to the staff that he'd found me on the road, possibly the victim of a bear attack. Then, with a tip of his cap and a look I couldn't quite interpret, he left. I spent 3 days in that small hospital, treated for exposure, dehydration, a severely sprained ankle, and deep lacerations across my back that the doctor said resembled claw marks. When they asked what had attacked me, I claimed not to have seen it, that I'd been running and felt something swipe at me from behind. They seemed to accept this, though I caught the nurses exchanging glances when they thought I wasn't looking. My backpack was never recovered. The police made a cursory search of the area where I'd been found but reported finding no evidence of my campsite or any of my gear. The GPS data from my phone, which was recovered and eventually recharged, showed nothing but a straight line from Whitecrest to a point about 2 miles into the forest, where the tracking abruptly ended. According to the timestamp, that final ping occurred just 3 hours after I'd started hiking on the first day. Impossible, given that I'd camped 2 nights before encountering Eliza. I never told anyone the full story. Who would believe me? Even now, typing this on my laptop in my Pittsburgh apartment 6 months later, I find myself doubting my own memories. Maybe it was a psychotic episode triggered by isolation and exhaustion. Maybe I did encounter a bear, and my mind created an elaborate fantasy rather than face the trauma of the attack. but then I'll catch a glimpse of the scars on my back in the bathroom mirror. 5 parallel lines, too precise and deliberate for any natural animal's claws. Or I'll wake in the night to what sounds like whispers outside my bedroom window, 17 stories above the city streets. And sometimes, in those moments between sleep and waking, I smell herbs and wood smoke and feel cold fingers caressing my face. The gas station in Whitecrest is gone now. Burned to the ground 3 weeks after my experience, the attendant nowhere to be found. The official maps of the Appalachian National Forest no longer show Blackwater Gorge at all, just an unnamed stretch of protected woodland with no trails marked. But it's there. Eliza and her sisters are there, waiting, and sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder if I truly escaped at all, or if this life I've returned to is simply the last, cruel illusion before they take what they need from me. Because every night, without fail, I dream of the cabin, of Eliza's sad smile, of her final words to me as the truck pulled away, words I couldn't possibly have heard across that distance but did. The gorge keeps what the gorge claims, Jacob Carter. You're still with us? You'll always be with us now. And in the dream, I look down at my hands and watch as they slowly, inexorably begin to crumble into black soil and moss, returning to the forest that has already claimed me. My name is Emily Hall, and I am 29 years old. This happened in the most remote part of the Appalachian Mountains, a place locals call Black Hollow, near the border of West Virginia and Virginia. I never believed in the supernatural before this trip. Now I'm not sure what to believe anymore. When my 2 closest friends, Samantha and Melissa, suggested a week-long hiking expedition to disconnect and recharge, I thought it was exactly what I needed. My recent divorce had left me emotionally drained, and work at the marketing firm had become increasingly demanding. I needed an escape. Little did I know that what awaited us in those ancient mountains would be far worse than anything I was running from. We chose the Black Hollow Trail, infamous among serious hikers for its challenging terrain and stunning vistas. The trail was secluded enough that we'd likely have the wilderness to ourselves, which appealed to all of us. 3 women in our late 20s seeking solitude and a break from our hyper-connected lives. The reviews say cell service is basically non-existent, Samantha had said excitedly, her dark curls bouncing as she scrolled through her phone. Perfect for our digital detox. And look at these views, Melissa added, showing us photos of mist-covered peaks and dense forests. Worth every blister we're going to get. I nodded, trying to muster their enthusiasm. Something had been nagging at me about this trip, a formless anxiety I couldn't place, but I dismissed it as lingering stress from the divorce. The mountains would help me heal, or so I thought. We arrived in the small town of Creedmoor on a Wednesday afternoon, a forgotten place that seemed frozen in time. As we stopped for supplies at the only general store, I noticed how conversations halted when we entered, how eyes followed us with wary curiosity. "You folks headed up to Black Hollow?" asked the elderly store owner, Wesley Harmon according to his name tag, as he rang up our extra batteries and dried food. "Yes, planning to spend about 5 days on the trail," Samantha replied cheerfully. The old man's weathered face tightened. "Might want to reconsider. Storm's coming in this weekend." "We checked the forecast," Melissa said. "Looks clear through Sunday." "Forecasts don't know those mountains like locals do," he muttered, sliding our purchases across the counter. Then, almost as an afterthought, "Stay on the marked trails, and don't camp near Blackwater Creek no matter how pretty it looks." Before we could ask why, the bell above the door jangled, and an emaciated man with hollow eyes shuffled in. His gaze locked with mine, and a chill ran down my spine. His lips moved silently, forming words I couldn't make out. "Let's go," I whispered to my friends, suddenly eager to leave. Back in our car, Melissa laughed. "Small towns, always with the cryptic warnings. It's like they're contractually obligated to creep out tourists." "I don't know," I said, glancing back at the store. The thin man was watching us through the window. There was something off about this place. "That's just your city girl paranoia," Samantha teased. "Besides, we've got bear spray, emergency beacons, and each other. What could go wrong?" Everything, as it turned out, everything could go wrong. We reached the trailhead by late afternoon. The forest seemed to swallow us as we hiked the first few miles, dense canopies of ancient oaks and towering pines blocking out the fading sunlight. The air felt heavier here, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. We set up our first camp in a small clearing, about 4 miles in. As darkness fell, the forest came alive with sounds: the hoot of an owl, the rustle of nocturnal creatures, the whisper of wind through leaves. But beneath those familiar noises was something else, something that made the hairs on my arms stand on end, a stillness that felt watchful. "Did you hear that?" I asked, sitting up in my sleeping bag. "Hear what?" Samantha murmured, already half asleep. "I don't know. Like whispering." "Probably just the wind," Melissa said, poking at our dying campfire. "Or your imagination working overtime." Maybe she was right. I tried to relax, but sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of being watched by eyes I couldn't see. The next day dawned bright and clear, washing away my nighttime fears. We hiked deeper into the wilderness, following the trail as it wound up the mountain. The physical exertion felt good, cleansing, even. For the first time since my divorce, I wasn't thinking about what went wrong or what would come next. Around midday, we reached a ridge that offered breathtaking views of the valley below. Forest stretched as far as the eye could see, an endless sea of green broken only by the silver ribbon of Blackwater Creek winding through the landscape. "Look how it catches the light," Melissa said, pointing to the creek. "We should camp near it tonight." I remembered the store owner's warning but couldn't recall why he'd told us to avoid it. The creek looked serene, inviting. "The trail doesn't go that way," I said, checking our map. "We'd have to go off course." "Only by a mile or so," Samantha noted, tracing the potential route with her finger. "And look how flat it is along the water. Much better than sleeping on another rocky slope." I hesitated, but the logic was sound. We altered our course, making our way down toward the glittering creek. Blackwater Creek was even more beautiful up close. The water ran clear despite the name, bubbling over smooth stones. Tall grass grew along its banks, providing a natural cushion for our tents. We made camp in a picturesque spot where the creek widened into a small pool before continuing its journey downstream. As evening approached, we sat by our campfire, sharing a bottle of whiskey Melissa had smuggled in her pack. The golden light of sunset gave way to deep blues and purples, and stars began to appear in the darkening sky. It was peaceful, perfect. Until the whispering started again. At first, I thought it was just the creek. Water flowing over rocks can sound remarkably like human voices. But as darkness fell completely, the sounds became more distinct. Words just beyond comprehension, coming from the water itself. "Do you guys hear that?" I asked, keeping my voice low. Samantha and Melissa exchanged glances. "The creek," Samantha offered. "No, the voices, coming from the water." Melissa's smile faded slightly. There aren't any voices. It's just the water and the wind." I wanted to believe her, but the whispering seemed to grow louder as she spoke, as if in defiance of her denial. I stood up, moving closer to the creek's edge. The water reflected the moonlight, silver and black, swirling in hypnotic patterns. "Emily. Emily." I jerked back. That was my name. I was sure of it. "I think we should move camp," I said, returning to the fire. "Now." "In the dark?" Melissa looked incredulous. "That's way more dangerous than staying put." "We're not breaking camp because you're hearing things," Samantha said firmly. "Get some sleep, Em. You'll feel better in the morning." I didn't argue further, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd made a terrible mistake camping here. I lay awake in my tent long after my friends had fallen asleep, listening to the whispers that seemed to grow more insistent as the night wore on. Join us. So lonely here. Come to the water. I must have fallen asleep eventually because I woke with a start to find early morning light filtering through my tent. The whispering had stopped, replaced by birdsong and the gentle babble of the creek. I felt foolish for my fears the night before. Clearly, I'd been overtired, my mind playing tricks. I unzipped my tent and stepped out into the cool morning air. Mist hung over the creek, giving the campsite an ethereal quality. Samantha's tent was already open, her sleeping bag empty. Melissa was still asleep in hers, soft snores confirming she was dead to the world. I assumed Samantha had gone to refill our water or maybe to find a private spot to relieve herself. I busied myself rekindling the fire, but as minutes stretched into a half hour, concern began to gnaw at me. "Melissa," I called, shaking her tent. "Wake up, Sam's gone." Melissa emerged, bleary-eyed and disheveled. "What do you mean, gone?" "Her tent's empty. She's not here." We called for Samantha, our voices echoing through the trees. No response. "Maybe she went for an early hike?" Melissa suggested, but her voice lacked conviction. "Without telling us? Without taking her pack?" I pointed to Samantha's backpack, still propped against a nearby tree. We searched the immediate area, finding nothing but a single hiking boot near the creek's edge. Samantha's. "We need to get help," I said, fear knotting my stomach. "The nearest ranger station is a day's hike back," Melissa reminded me, "and our emergency beacon is in Sam's pack." We stood by the creek, indecision paralyzing us. That's when I noticed the water had changed. No longer clear, it now ran darker, with an oily sheen on its surface. And was it higher than it had been last night? The spot where we'd filled our water bottles was now submerged. "The creek's rising," I said. "We need to move our camp." As we packed up, I couldn't help but notice other changes. The birdsong had stopped. The forest around us had grown unnaturally quiet. Even the air felt different. Heavier, charged with an energy I couldn't name. We were striking our tents when we heard it, a familiar voice calling from downstream. "Emily, Melissa, down here!" Samantha. Relief flooded through me as we ran toward the sound. We rounded a bend in the creek and there she was, standing knee-deep in the water, her back to us. "Sam!" Melissa cried. "We were so worried." Samantha turned slowly, and my relief curdled into horror. It was her face, yes, but somehow wrong. Her features slightly askew, her eyes too wide, her smile stretching beyond the natural corners of her mouth. Water streamed constantly from her hair, her clothing, her fingertips, as if she were perpetually melting. "Come in," she said, her voice garbled as if speaking through liquid. "The water's wonderful. I've never felt so complete." Melissa took a step forward, but I grabbed her arm. "That's not Sam," I whispered. "Don't be ridiculous," she hissed, pulling away. "She's right there. Mel, look at her. Really look." Melissa hesitated, then really focused on our friend. I saw the moment recognition turn to horror in her eyes. "Sam," she called, her voice trembling. "What's happened to you?" The thing that wore Samantha's face tilted its head at an impossible angle. "I've been accepted," it said. "They've been so lonely here, waiting so long for new friends." As it spoke, the water around it began to churn, dark shapes moving beneath the surface. Hands, dozens of pale, waterlogged hands, broke through, reaching upward like grotesque water lilies. "Run!" I breathed, tugging at Melissa's arm. "Run!" We sprinted back toward our half-dismantled camp, grabbed what we could, and fled into the forest away from the creek. Behind us, I heard something pursuing. Not the splash of feet through water, but a horrible slithering sound, like a massive, wet body dragging itself across land. We ran until our lungs burned, following the terrain upward, hoping whatever was behind us couldn't manage the steep climb. When we finally stopped, gasping for breath on a rocky outcropping, there was no sign of pursuit. "What the fuck was that?" Melissa panted, bent double with her hands on her knees. "I don't know," I admitted, "but it wasn't Samantha. How do we help her? We can't just leave her." I looked at Melissa, seeing the same terrible realization in her eyes that I felt in my gut. I don't think that was Samantha anymore. I don't think she's there to help. We spent the night huddled on that rocky outcrop, too terrified to light a fire, too afraid to sleep. We had one tent between us, Samantha's pack with the emergency beacon, and our own half-filled backpacks. Not enough food, not enough water, and no clear path forward. Morning brought no relief. A thick fog had settled over the mountain, reducing visibility to mere feet. We couldn't see the creek, couldn't orient ourselves to the trail. Our only option was to keep climbing, hoping to get above the fog and find our bearings. We walked in silence, both lost in our own thoughts. What had happened to Samantha? What were those things in the water? And would we ever make it out of these mountains alive? Around midday, the fog began to thin, and we found ourselves on a narrow ridge, the land falling away steeply on either side. Below us, we could see Blackwater Creek, now swollen to twice its previous size, cutting through the forest like a dark wound. "Look," Melissa pointed to a structure in the distance. "Is that a cabin?" Through the thinning mist, I could make out what appeared to be a small wooden building tucked against the mountainside. A thin wisp of smoke rose from its chimney. "People," I breathed. "Thank God." Hope renewed our energy as we made our way toward the cabin. It was slow going. The terrain was treacherous and the hiking paths seemed to shift and disappear before our eyes. More than once, I found myself walking in circles, disoriented, as if the mountain itself was trying to keep us lost. By late afternoon, exhausted and increasingly desperate, we finally reached the cabin. It was older than it had appeared from a distance. The logs weathered and gray, the small windows cloudy with age. But the smoke meant someone was inside, someone who might help us. I knocked on the door, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet forest. For a long moment, there was no response. Then came the sound of shuffling footsteps, and the door creaked open. An elderly woman peered out at us, her face a mass of wrinkles surrounding sharp, assessing eyes. She looked ancient, but those eyes were bright with intelligence and something else. Wariness, perhaps, or resignation. "You girls shouldn't be here," she said, her voice surprisingly strong, not with the creek rising. "Please," I said, "our friend is missing. We need help." The old woman's eyes narrowed. "Missing near the creek?" We nodded. She sighed heavily and stepped back. "You better come in, then." The cabin's interior was spare but neat. A single room with a small cooking area, a bed in one corner, and a wooden table at its center. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling, filling the air with a pungent, not entirely pleasant scent. "Sit," she commanded, gesturing to the table. We obeyed, our legs grateful for the rest. The woman busied herself at the stove, returning with 2 mugs of something hot that smelled of pine and spices. "Drink," she said. "It'll help clear your heads." The tea was bitter but warming. As it spread through my body, I felt some of the fog lift from my mind, some of the paralyzing fear recede. "I'm Emily," I said. "This is Melissa, our friend, Samantha. Something happened to her at the creek." "I expect it did," the woman said grimly. "I'm Agatha Blackwater. My family's lived on this mountain for 8 generations. We know what the creek takes." "Takes?" Melissa asked, her voice small. Agatha nodded, her face solemn. "The creek's been hungry lately. Hungrier than I've ever seen it. That's why I tried to warn you." "Warn us?" I asked, confused. "At the store. I told Wesley to turn you back." I remembered the thin man with the hollow eyes, the words I couldn't make out. Had that been this woman? It seemed impossible. The figure in the store had definitely been male, but in this place I was beginning to doubt everything I thought I knew. "What is it?" Melissa asked. "What's in the creek?" Agatha's eyes grew distant. "Something old. Something that came with the first settlers and never left. My people called it the water taker." "But what happened to Samantha?" I pressed. "We saw her, but she was wrong." "Not her anymore," Agatha said flatly. "Just something wearing her like a suit. The creek takes what it wants. First the body, then the mind, then the soul. By the time you saw her, there wasn't much of your friend left." "That's insane," Melissa whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice. "Insane or not, it's the truth," Agatha replied. "And now it's got the taste of you two as well. It'll be coming." "Coming?" I echoed. "But we're far from the water now." Agatha's laugh was hollow. "You think that matters? The creek is the water taker's voice, not its body. It can reach much further than you think." As if summoned by her words, a low rumble sounded outside. The cabin trembled slightly, cups rattling on their hooks. "What was that?" Melissa asked, eyes wide. Agatha moved to the window, peering out. "The creek's flooding. Hasn't done that in years." She turned back to us, her expression grave. "It's coming for you." "How do we stop it?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. "You don't," she said simply. "The best you can hope for is to escape it, to get off this mountain before it finds you." "And Samantha?" Melissa asked. Agatha's silence was answer enough. The rumbling grew louder. Through the window, I could see the trees bending in a wind that hadn't been there moments before. Dark clouds gathered overhead, unnaturally fast. "It's starting a storm," Agatha muttered, using the rain to extend its reach. She moved quickly around the cabin, gathering items: a jar of salt, bundles of herbs, a knife with strange markings on its handle. "Take these," she said, pressing them into my hands. "Salt forms a barrier it can't easily cross. The herbs will mask your scent from it. And the knife—" She hesitated. "The knife won't kill it, but it might slow whatever it sends after you." "What about you?" I asked. Agatha's smile was thin. "I've lived with it my whole life. We have an understanding, the water taker and I. So long as I stay here, tend to my cabin, it leaves me be. But I can't protect you, not from this." She looked out the window again, her expression hardening. "You need to go. Now. Head east, away from the creek. Don't stop until you're off this mountain." We didn't waste time arguing. Gathering our meager supplies and Agatha's gifts, we stepped out into the gathering storm. The wind hit us immediately, so strong it nearly knocked us off our feet. "Go!" Agatha shouted from the doorway. "And whatever you do, don't trust your eyes." We ran, fighting against the wind as the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. The forest had transformed into a nightmarish obstacle course, branches whipping at our faces, roots reaching up to trip us, the very ground seeming to shift beneath our feet. "Which way is east?" Melissa yelled over the howling wind. I pulled out my compass, but the needle spun wildly, refusing to settle. "I don't know, just away from the creek." We chose a direction and ran, the storm intensifying with every step. Rain lashed at us, so heavy it was like running through a waterfall. Lightning split the sky, followed immediately by deafening thunder. And then I saw it, a figure through the trees, moving parallel to us. A flash of lightning illuminated it briefly. Samantha, or what had once been Samantha, her movements jerky and unnatural, her head turning too far as she tracked our progress. "Faster!" I screamed to Melissa. We ran blindly now, terror giving us speed. The forest grew denser, the trees pressing in on all sides. Several times I lost sight of Melissa in the downpour, only to find her again moments later, her face a mask of determination and fear. The ground began to slope upward sharply. We were climbing again, muscles burning, lungs heaving, but the higher we went, the further we'd be from the creek, from the water taker. Lightning struck a tree just ahead of us, splitting it down the middle. As we skirted around the smoldering trunk, I heard Melissa cry out. Turning, I saw she'd fallen, her leg caught in a tangle of roots that seemed to be tightening around her ankle. I rushed back, using Agatha's knife to hack at the roots. They severed with surprising ease, oozing a dark, blood-like sap. "Can you walk?" I asked, helping Melissa to her feet. She tested her weight and winced. "I think it's just twisted. I can keep going." But she was slowing us down, each step clearly painful. And behind us, closing the distance, came that slithering sound again, wet bodies dragging themselves across the forest floor. We crested a ridge, the ground leveling out momentarily. Through the curtain of rain, I could make out a structure ahead, larger than Agatha's cabin, made of stone rather than wood. "There," I pointed. "If we can reach that, maybe we can hold out until the storm passes." Melissa nodded grimly, limping forward with renewed determination. As we drew closer, I could see it was an old fire tower, a stone base with a metal observation deck at the top. Abandoned from the look of it, but solid, defensible. We were 20 feet from the tower when Melissa screamed. I turned to see her lifted off her feet, something wrapped around her waist, a tendril of water, impossibly reaching up from the soaked ground, solid enough to hold her aloft. I didn't think. I slashed at it with Agatha's knife, and the water tendril burst, splashing to the ground as ordinary water. Melissa fell heavily, but scrambled immediately to her feet. "Go!" she shouted, pushing me toward the tower. We burst through the rusted door, slamming it behind us. The tower's interior was cold and damp, dust and cobwebs coating every surface. A metal staircase wound upward to the observation deck. "Upstairs," I said. "We'll have a better view of what's coming." We climbed, Melissa gritting her teeth against the pain in her ankle. The observation deck was enclosed in windows on all sides, many broken, but it still offered some protection from the elements. Through the rain-streaked glass, we could see the storm was centered directly over us. A perfect circle of black clouds, rotating slowly like the eye of a hurricane. And moving through the trees toward the tower were shapes, human-like but wrong, their movements fluid and boneless. "They're coming," Melissa whispered. I pulled out the salt Agatha had given us, creating a circle around the perimeter of the room. "Get in," I told Melissa, who didn't need to be asked twice. The first of the creatures reached the tower just as I completed the circle. Through the broken window, I could see it clearly, a thing of water and mud shaped vaguely like a person, with holes where eyes should be and a gash-like mouth. Behind it came others, a dozen or more, surrounding the tower. And among them, in the lead, was the thing that had been Samantha, more decayed than before, her body moving like a puppet with half its strings cut. "Emily," it called in a voice that was both Samantha's and not. "Emily, we miss you. Come join us." "Don't listen," Melissa warned, clutching my arm. "Remember what Agatha said. Don't trust your eyes." The creatures began to climb the tower, oozing through cracks in the stone, rising toward us like a slow, inexorable tide. We watched in horror as they reached the observation deck, pressing against the windows, searching for a way in. The thing that had been Samantha found a broken pane and thrust an arm through, the limb elongating impossibly, reaching for us. But it stopped at the salt line, unable to cross. "It's working," I breathed. "For now," Melissa said, eyeing the rain that blew in through the broken windows. "But if the salt gets wet—" She didn't need to finish the thought. Already, small rivulets of water were working their way across the floor, gradually dissolving our protection. "We need a more permanent solution," I said, looking around desperately. The observation deck was largely empty, save for an old metal desk bolted to the floor and the remains of what might have been communications equipment. Nothing useful, nothing we could use as a weapon. Except fire, I said suddenly. "They're made of water. Maybe fire would hurt them." Melissa's eyes widened. "The whiskey. From my pack." She rummaged through her bag, producing the half-empty bottle. I tore strips from my shirt, creating makeshift wicks that we stuffed into the bottle. If we set this place on fire, we could burn too, Melissa pointed out. I looked at the water creatures, now pushing harder against our failing barrier. At Samantha, her face melting and reforming continuously, her eyes, if you could call them that, fixed hungrily on us. Better than whatever they'll do to us, I said grimly. I didn't have matches, but I did have a lighter. A small comfort in the wilderness, something I'd brought along almost unconsciously. Small blessings. We positioned ourselves near the staircase, ready to flee downstairs if necessary. The salt line was breaking in several places now, water creatures pushing eagerly through the gaps. "Now!" I shouted, lighting the makeshift Molotov cocktail and hurling it at the largest cluster of creatures. The bottle shattered, whiskey igniting in a brilliant blue flame. The effect on the water creatures was immediate and horrifying. They didn't burn so much as boil, their watery bodies bubbling and steaming. Their silent screams felt rather than heard as a pressure in our ears. The thing that had been Samantha recoiled, retreating from the flames. The other creatures followed suit, slithering back through the broken windows down the side of the tower. "It's working!" Melissa cried. "They're retreating!" But our victory was short-lived. The fire spread quickly, consuming the dry, rotted wood of the tower's interior. Smoke filled the observation deck, thick and choking. "We need to get out," I coughed, pulling Melissa toward the stairs. We descended in a rush, the metal steps hot beneath our hands. The tower was becoming an inferno, the ancient wood feeding the flames hungrily. When we reached the bottom, I hesitated, hand on the door. Were the water creatures waiting outside? Had we merely traded one death for another? A section of the roof collapsed above us, sending a shower of burning debris onto the stairs we'd just descended. "No choice," Melissa said, reading my thoughts. "We have to go." I nodded, pushed open the door, and we ran out into the storm. The rain had lessened somewhat, though the sky remained dark. There was no sign of the water creatures, but I didn't trust their absence. They could be anywhere, in the puddles at our feet, in the drops of rain still falling, in the mist that clung to the trees. Behind us, the fire tower was fully engulfed, flames shooting from every window despite the rain. It stood like a beacon in the darkness, marking our position to anything that might be hunting us. "Which way?" Melissa asked, limping beside me. I glanced at the sky, trying to orient myself. East, away from the creek. We set off downhill, moving as quickly as Melissa's injury would allow. The forest was quieter now, the storm's fury spent, but that only made it easier to hear the sounds behind us. The splash of something moving through puddles, the wet slap of something dragging itself across the ground. "They're following," I whispered. Melissa didn't waste breath responding. She pushed forward, gritting her teeth against the pain in her ankle. We had been walking for perhaps an hour when the trees began to thin. Ahead, I could make out what looked like a road, narrow and unpaved, but definitely human-made. "Almost there," I encouraged Melissa, who was now leaning heavily on me. The sounds behind us grew louder, more urgent. Looking back, I saw shapes moving through the underbrush. Not just one or two, but dozens, converging on our position. "Run!" I urged, practically dragging Melissa now. We broke through the tree line onto the road just as the first of the water creatures emerged from the forest. In the faint moonlight now breaking through the clouds, they looked even more horrific. Vaguely human-shaped collections of mud and water, their movements jerky and wrong, and at their center, still leading them, was what remained of Samantha. She was barely recognizable now, her features melted away to reveal something else beneath, something ancient and hungry and patient. "Emily," it called, its voice a wet, gurgling parody of my friend's. "You can't leave us, we're family now." "That's not Samantha," I reminded myself aloud. The water creatures began to spread out, forming a semicircle cutting off our escape routes. They were herding us, I realized, back toward the forest, back toward the creek. A sound cut through the night, an engine growing louder. Headlights appeared around a bend in the road, illuminating the scene in harsh white light. The water creatures froze, caught in the glare. For a moment, everything was still. Then, as one, they began to retreat, slithering back into the darkness of the forest. All except the thing that had been Samantha. It stood its ground, staring at us with its eyeless face. "This isn't over," it promised, its voice barely audible over the approaching vehicle. "The water taker remembers. The water taker waits." Then it, too, melted away, flowing into the earth like rainwater, leaving nothing but a damp patch on the road. The vehicle, an old pickup truck, skidded to a stop beside us. The driver's door opened, and a familiar figure stepped out. Wesley Harmon, the store owner from Creedmoor. "Get in," he said urgently. "Quick, before they come back." We didn't need to be told twice. We climbed into the truck, filthy and exhausted and traumatized, but alive. As Wesley sped away, I looked back at the dark mass of the forest behind us. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing at the forest's edge, tall and inhumanly thin, made entirely of water that reflected the moonlight like polished glass. Then the truck rounded a bend and the forest was lost from view. "Agatha called me," Wesley explained as he drove. "Said you two were in trouble. Said the water taker was hunting again." "You believe in it?" Melissa asked weakly from beside me. Wesley's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. "Around here, it ain't about believing. It's about respecting what you don't understand." I nodded, too exhausted to speak. We had escaped, but at what cost? Samantha was gone, taken by something I still couldn't fully comprehend, and part of me wondered if we had truly escaped at all, or if the water taker had simply let us go for now, confident in its patience, in the eternity it had to wait. When we reached Creedmoor, Wesley took us to the local clinic, a small building staffed by a single nurse practitioner who asked no questions about our injuries or our missing friend. It was as if the entire town knew what haunted their mountains and had made their peace with its hunger long ago. We reported Samantha missing to the authorities, of course. They searched the area around Blackwater Creek for days, finding nothing. Eventually, they concluded she had simply fallen into the creek and drowned, her body carried away by the current. A tragic hiking accident. Melissa and I knew better, but who would believe the truth? Who would accept that something ancient and hungry lived in those mountains, wearing human faces like masks, collecting souls like trophies? We returned to our normal lives, our normal routines. But normality is a fragile thing, easily shattered. At night, I still hear the whispers, the voice of the water taker calling to me from every faucet, every puddle, every raindrop that streaks my window. "Emily, Emily, we're waiting for you." And sometimes when it rains, I see her watching me from across the street, from behind trees, from the reflections in store windows. Samantha, but not Samantha. Waiting, patient, eternal. I avoid the mountains now. I avoid water when I can. But deep down, I know it doesn't matter. The water taker found me once. It marked me. And sooner or later it will come for me again. When that happens, I only hope I'm strong enough to resist its call. Because I've seen what lies beneath Blackwater Creek, in the depths of those dark waters, and it is nothing human minds were meant to comprehend. 3 months have passed since our escape from the Appalachian Mountains. Melissa moved across the country, to Arizona, a desert state where water is scarce and precious, a place where an ancient water entity might have less power. We still talk weekly, but never about what happened. Some horrors are too great to revisit, even in conversation. I stayed in my apartment in Pittsburgh, unable to uproot my life completely, but I've changed in countless small ways. I take showers instead of baths now. I avoid swimming pools, lakes, even heavy rain. I keep salt in every room of my house, not for cooking, but for protection. Most people would say I'm traumatized, suffering from delusions brought on by the loss of my friend. That's what the therapist I briefly saw suggested, before I stopped going. How could I explain that every time it rains I see faces in the puddles? That sometimes my shower water runs black for just a moment before clearing again? That, occasionally, when I'm alone, I hear Samantha's voice calling from my kitchen sink. Last week, I received a package. No return address, just my name scrawled in shaky handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a small leather pouch filled with dried herbs that smelled of pine and something else, something bitter. And a note. Just 3 words. It's still coming. I recognized the herbs, the same mixture Agatha had given us that night in her cabin. A warning, or perhaps a final act of kindness from an old woman who understood the water taker better than anyone. 2 days ago, my phone rang at 3 a.m. The caller ID showed Samantha's name, a number that should have been disconnected months ago. I let it go to voicemail. The message was nothing but the sound of running water and, beneath it, whispers I couldn't quite make out. I'm writing this all down now because I need someone to know the truth. The water taker is real. It lives in the Appalachian Mountains, in a place called Black Hollow. It wears the faces of those it takes, uses their voices to lure others, collects souls like precious stones, and I don't think I'm going to escape it much longer. This morning, I woke to find wet footprints leading from my bathroom to my bed. Small, delicate prints that could only belong to a woman. Samantha's size. Tonight, it's raining again. Heavy drops pounding against my windows like fingers demanding entry. The water in my bathroom tap has turned black, and I can hear it whispering my name even though I've shut it off at the main valve. I've called Melissa, but there's no answer. I've salted my doors and windows, clutched Agatha's herbs until my palms are stained green with their oils, but I know it won't be enough. The water taker is patient, eternal. It has found me, just as I always feared it would. If you're reading this, please, stay away from Black Hollow. Stay away from Blackwater Creek. And if you ever hear whispering coming from still water, run. Run as far and as fast as you can. Because once the water taker knows your name, it never, ever forgets. I hear the bathroom door creaking open now, though I barricaded it shut hours ago. There's a sound, that terrible wet slithering I remember from the mountains, and a voice. Samantha's voice, but wrong, distorted as if speaking through liquid. Emily, I've missed you. It's time to come home. I won't go easily. I have Agatha's knife, though I don't know if it will be enough. I have my will, my determination to remain myself, to not become what Samantha became. But the whispering is so loud now, so persuasive, so familiar. Part of me wants to answer its call, to stop fighting, to let the water take me, to join Samantha in whatever dark eternity awaits beneath Blackwater Creek. But another part, the part that is still Emily Hall, the part that survived those terrible days in the mountains, that part will fight until the end. The knob on my bedroom door is turning now. Water is seeping underneath, black and oily and wrong. I don't have much time left. Remember my story. My name is Michelle Young, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the remote backcountry of Monongahela National Forest, West Virginia, along the less traveled sections of the Appalachian Trail near Spruce Knob. I still wake up screaming some nights, my body drenched in sweat, the memories as fresh as an open wound. It was supposed to be a healing trip. That's what my therapist called it, a chance to process my grief over losing my sister Alicia the year before. Reconnect with nature, Dr. Walden had suggested during our last session. Find some peace in solitude. Peace, what a cruel joke that word became. I'd been an avid hiker before Alicia's accident. We both were. But after she died, after I found her that way, I'd packed away my gear and tried to forget the outdoors existed. Until that spring morning when I finally pulled my dusty backpack from the closet and decided it was time. The drive to the Seneca Creek trailhead took nearly 6 hours from my apartment in Pittsburgh. By the time I arrived, the afternoon sun was already beginning its slow descent behind the ridgeline of ancient mountains. I planned a 4-day loop through some of the most isolated sections of the forest, ending at Spruce Knob Lake. The ranger who checked my permit raised an eyebrow when I told him I was going alone. "That's pretty remote country, ma'am," he said, his weathered face creasing with concern. "Especially the Hollow Gap area. Not many folks go through there these days." "I need the solitude," I replied, not meeting his eyes. He hesitated before stamping my permit. "Well, stay on the marked trails. We had some strange incidents up near Seneca Creek last month. Probably nothing, but still." "What kind of incidents?" I asked, suddenly curious. "Missing gear, mostly. Couple hikers said they heard unusual noises at night. Probably just bears." He handed me back my permit. "Or locals having fun with out-of-towners. Either way, keep your food secured and your wits about you." I nodded, thanked him, and headed to the trailhead. The path started gently enough, winding through sun-dappled hardwood forests. The familiar weight of my pack against my shoulders and the rhythmic crunch of leaves beneath my boots felt like greeting an old friend. For the first time in months, my chest didn't feel quite so tight. The mountain air filled my lungs, crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and rich soil. That first day, I hiked until twilight painted the forest in dusky purples and deep blues. I set up camp in a small clearing near a creek, the burbling water a soothing companion as I erected my one-person tent and gathered wood for a fire. After a simple dinner of dehydrated pasta, I sat by the flames, watching the sparks spiral upward to join the emerging stars. My first night passed uneventfully, though I dreamed of Alicia. Not the broken body I'd found at the base of that cliff, but Alicia laughing, her hair whipping in the mountain wind as she stood triumphantly atop a summit we'd conquered together. I woke with tears on my cheeks but a strange lightness in my heart. The second day took me deeper into the wilderness. The trail grew steeper, more challenging, as it ascended toward the ridgeline. By mid-afternoon, the pleasant exertion had turned to a deep ache in my calves and shoulders. I welcomed the pain. It was honest, uncomplicated, so different from the grief that had consumed me for the past year. Around 4 o'clock, I reached an overlook that offered a breathtaking panorama of the valley below. Rolling mountains stretched to the horizon, their slopes dappled with the varied greens of early summer foliage. I paused to drink from my water bottle and check my topographic map. That's when I first felt it, a subtle wrongness that raised the fine hairs on the back of my neck. Nothing I could point to specifically, just a sense that I was being observed. I scanned the tree line behind me but saw nothing except wind-rustled leaves and patches of sunlight dappling the forest floor. "Get it together, Michelle," I muttered to myself, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to my own ears. "This is why you're here, to stop jumping at shadows." I continued along the ridge for another 2 hours before beginning my descent toward Hollow Gap, where I planned to make camp for the night. The gap was a deep depression between two mountain ridges, with Seneca Creek running through its center. According to my map, there was a designated camping area near the creek, one of the few maintained sites in this remote section. As I descended, the forest changed. The friendly, open hardwoods gave way to densely packed hemlocks and pines, their branches blocking much of the late afternoon light. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the air took on a damp, almost moldy quality. The path narrowed, forcing me to navigate between close-set trees and over gnarled roots that seemed to reach for my ankles with malicious intent. I reached Hollow Gap just as the last rays of sunlight disappeared. The camping area was a small clearing near the creek, surrounded by ancient hemlocks that loomed like sentinels. I quickly set up my tent and gathered wood for a fire, uncomfortably aware of how the darkness seemed to press in from all sides, thicker and more absolute than the previous night. The fire refused to catch properly. The wood, though it appeared dry, smoldered rather than burned, producing more smoke than flame. The smoke had an acrid, unpleasant odor that reminded me vaguely of rotting meat. I persisted, using precious pages from my notebook as additional kindling, and eventually managed a modest blaze. As I heated water for my freeze-dried beef stew, I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest around me had fallen unnaturally silent. No insect chirps, no rustle of nocturnal creatures, not even the sound of wind in the trees. Only the creek provided any noise, its gurgling somehow more ominous than soothing in the oppressive quiet. I ate quickly, my appetite diminished, and secured my food bag in a tree well away from my tent. By the time I crawled into my sleeping bag, exhaustion had temporarily overcome my unease, and I fell into a fitful sleep. The dream began pleasantly enough. Alicia and I were hiking together on a sunny day, the trail ahead clear and inviting. But gradually the sky darkened, and the trail beneath our feet began to change, the dirt transforming to a soft, yielding substance that clutched at our boots. Alicia walked ahead, and suddenly the distance between us stretched impossibly. "Wait!" I called, but my voice made no sound. Alicia turned, her face initially familiar and beloved, but as she smiled, her features began to shift, becoming something wrong. Her eyes sank deeper into their sockets, her smile stretched too wide, revealing teeth that lengthened into pointed fangs before my eyes. "You left me," said the thing that was no longer my sister, its voice a rasping whisper that seemed to come from all around me. "You left me alone in the dark, Michelle." I woke with a strangled scream caught in my throat, my body drenched in cold sweat. The interior of my tent was pitch black. My watch told me it was 3:17 a.m., the darkest part of the night. Outside, the fire had died completely. As my breathing slowed, I became aware of a sound from beyond the thin nylon walls of my tent. Something moving. Not the clumsy crashing of a bear or deer, but a deliberate, stealthy movement. Soft footfalls circling my tent, pausing occasionally before continuing their measured circuit. I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, straining my eyes against the darkness. The footsteps completed their circle and paused directly outside the entrance to my tent. I could hear breathing, wet, labored breaths that reminded me of my grandfather in his final days, when pneumonia filled his lungs with fluid. "Hello?" I whispered, immediately regretting breaking the silence. The breathing stopped abruptly. 5 heartbeats of absolute silence followed. Then a scratching sound against the tent fabric, light at first, then more insistent. Not the random scrape of a branch, but deliberate, almost curious, like fingers exploring the barrier that separated us. I fumbled for my headlamp, my fingers trembling so badly I nearly dropped it. As I switched it on, the scratching ceased. I directed the beam toward the tent wall where the sound had come from, half expecting, half fearing, to see the silhouette of whatever stood outside. Nothing. No shadow, no movement. Just the green nylon illuminated by my light. I waited, barely breathing, for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Nothing moved outside. Eventually, exhaustion overrode my fear, and I drifted into an uneasy doze, the headlamp still clutched in my hand. Morning arrived with a heavy mist that clung to the trees and ground, reducing visibility to mere yards. I emerged from my tent cautiously, scanning the campsite for signs of my nocturnal visitor. The ground around my tent revealed nothing. No footprints, no disturbance of any kind in the carpet of pine needles and fallen leaves. Just a nightmare, I told myself, not believing it for a second. Or maybe an animal. I forced myself to go through the motions of my morning routine, filtering water from the creek, preparing instant oatmeal, packing up my gear. As I dismantled my tent, I noticed something that made my stomach clench. 3 parallel scratches in the nylon near the entrance. Too precise to be accidental, too uniform to be caused by a branch or animal claw. I traced them with my finger, feeling the smooth edges where the fabric had been sliced rather than torn. They weren't deep enough to compromise the tent's integrity. It was almost as if whatever had made them had been testing the material. learning its properties. I should have turned back then, should have hiked out the way I came and never looked back. But some combination of stubborn pride and the belief that I was overreacting pushed me to continue my planned route. I was heading toward more popular trails anyway. By nightfall, I'd be at a well-used camping area where other hikers would provide safety in numbers. The day's hike took me along Seneca Creek, following its winding course through Hollow Gap. The fog persisted, transforming the forest into a ghostly labyrinth where trees appeared suddenly out of the mist and familiar landmarks vanished once passed. The moisture in the air dampened every sound, creating a cocoon of silence broken only by my own movements and the occasional drip of condensation from leaf to ground. By mid-morning, I realized something was wrong with my navigation. According to my map, I should have reached a fork in the trail where Seneca Creek met a smaller tributary. But hours of hiking had revealed no such landmark, and the creek itself seemed to be flowing in the wrong direction, uphill rather than down, defying both gravity and logic. I stopped to consult my compass, only to find the needle spinning lazily, unable to settle on a direction. My phone had no service, as expected in these remote mountains, but its GPS function should still have worked. Instead, the blue dot that represented my location jumped erratically across the screen, sometimes placing me miles from where I knew I must be. Panic fluttered in my chest. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think rationally. The fog was disorienting me, that's all. The creek would lead me out of the gap eventually. I just needed to follow it downstream. But which way was downstream? The water seemed to move sluggishly, offering no clear indication of its direction. I dropped a leaf onto the surface and watched it drift, not with the current, but in a small, aimless circle before sinking below the surface. As I stood there trying to make sense of what I was seeing, I became aware of a foul odor seeping into the air around me. It reminded me of the smoke from my reluctant fire the night before, but stronger, more putrid, the unmistakable stench of decay. It seemed to be coming from upstream, or what I thought was upstream. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. The smell grew stronger as I followed the creek, becoming so intense that I covered my nose and mouth with my bandana. The fog thinned slightly, allowing me to see perhaps 20 feet ahead. The creek widened into a small pool, its water no longer clear but tinted a sickly brown. At the center of the pool, something broke the surface, a dark shape that I initially took for a partially submerged log. But as I drew closer, the shape resolved itself into something else entirely. It was a deer, or what remained of one. The animal's body was bloated with decomposition, its hide sloughing away in places to reveal blackened flesh beneath. But what turned my blood to ice was the realization that the deer was not simply dead, but wrong. Its limbs were bent at impossible angles, additional joints having formed where none should exist. Its neck twisted nearly 180 degrees, allowing the head to face directly backward, and the antlers, even in my state of shock, I knew that white-tailed deer in this region didn't grow antlers like these, spiraling and curved like corkscrews, their tips sharpened to needle points. Most disturbing of all were the deer's eyes, still intact despite the advanced decomposition of the rest of the body. They were open wide, and as I stared in horrified fascination, I could have sworn they tracked my movement. I stumbled backward, nearly losing my footing on the slick bank. As I regained my balance, my boot dislodged something from the mud, a small metallic object that glinted dully in the diffused light. I bent to examine it, grateful for any distraction from the monstrosity in the pool. It was a camera, a high-end digital model caked with dried mud but otherwise intact. The brand name had been scratched off, and there was no identification to indicate its owner. I turned it over in my hands, surprised when the power button responded to my touch, the screen flickering to life. The most recent photos had been taken approximately 2 weeks earlier, according to the timestamps. They showed a young couple, a man and woman in their mid-20s, smiling in front of landmarks I recognized from earlier in my hike. Jackson Taylor and Megan Walsh, according to the GPS tags on their photos. Typical hiking selfies at first, arms around each other's shoulders, making peace signs, mugging for the camera against scenic backdrops. Then the photos changed. The timestamps showed a progression over 3 days, the couple's journey taking them to the same area where I now stood. Their expressions in later photos showed increasing concern, their smiles becoming forced, then disappearing altogether. The final day's images captured their campsite, the same spot I'd used the previous night. The last photo made my breath catch. Taken at night, illuminated only by flash, it showed their tent from the outside, and standing beside it, partially caught by the light, was a figure. Humanoid, but wrong in all the ways the deer had been wrong. Limbs too long, joints too numerous, body unnaturally thin. Its face was turned toward the camera, but where features should have been, there was only a blank expanse of grayish skin, smooth and featureless except for a horizontal seam where a mouth might be. I dropped the camera as if it had burned me, my heart hammering against my ribs. Looking back at the pool, I saw that the deer's body was gone, leaving not even a ripple to mark where it had been. The water flowed normally now, clearly revealing which way was downstream. I ran. Dignity and caution abandoned, I simply ran, following the creek away from that accursed pool. The fog seemed to part before me, no longer the disorienting soup it had been minutes before. My pack bounced painfully against my back, but I didn't slow down until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to buckle. When I finally stopped, bracing myself against a tree trunk as I gasped for air, I knew with chilling certainty that I was not alone. The forest had fallen silent again, that same unnatural hush I'd noticed the night before. And somewhere behind me, something moved with deliberate purpose. I pushed off from the tree, forcing my exhausted legs to carry me forward. The trail was clearer now, showing obvious signs of use, a small mercy that gave me hope I was nearing more frequented areas of the forest. The creek paralleled my path, its gentle gurgling the only sound besides my labored breathing and the crunch of my boots. The afternoon wore on, the fog gradually burning away to reveal a sky of unblemished blue. Under different circumstances, it would have been a perfect day for hiking. Now, the returning bird songs and normal forest sounds only heightened my sense of unreality, making the morning's experiences seem like a bad dream. By late afternoon, I reached a trail junction marked with the first signpost I'd seen since entering Hollow Gap. The weathered wooden sign pointed left toward Spruce Knob Lake, my original destination, and right toward the ranger station, a slightly shorter route that would take me back to civilization more quickly. I turned right without hesitation. The trail widened as it descended, showing signs of recent maintenance. I passed 2-day hikers heading in the opposite direction, an elderly couple who nodded pleasantly as we crossed paths. I nearly wept at this simple human contact, this confirmation that the normal world still existed. "Camping up at the lake?" the man asked conversationally. "No," I managed, my voice surprisingly steady. "Headed back to the ranger station." "Probably wise," his wife commented. "Storm coming in tonight according to the forecast. Supposed to be a bad one." I glanced up at the cloudless sky, momentarily confused, but thanked them and continued on my way, eager to put as much distance as possible between myself and Hollow Gap before nightfall. The sun was low on the horizon when I spotted a wooden shelter set back from the trail, one of the 3-sided Adirondack structures common along the Appalachian Trail, providing refuge for hikers caught in inclement weather. According to my map, the ranger station was still 6 miles away, too far to reach before dark. The shelter would have to do. It was unoccupied but showed signs of recent use, a partially burned log in the fire pit, some discarded food wrappers stuffed carelessly into a corner. I swept these out and set about making the space as secure as I could, though the open front of the shelter made true security impossible. As darkness fell, the weather deteriorated rapidly. Perhaps the elderly couple's forecast had been accurate after all. Clouds rolled in from the west, obliterating the stars and bringing with them a bitter wind that moaned through the trees. I built a fire in the stone pit before the shelter, grateful when this one caught easily and burned with a clean, bright flame. Despite my exhaustion, I was reluctant to sleep. Every time my eyes drifted closed, images from the day flashed across my mind: the wrongly jointed deer, the faceless figure in the photograph. I fed twigs into the fire and waited for the storm to break. It began with lightning, brilliant forks that illuminated the forest in stark relief, followed seconds later by thunder that seemed to shake the very ground. The rain, when it came, fell in sheets, hissing as it struck the fire and sending plumes of steam into the air. I retreated deeper into the shelter, wrapping my sleeping bag around my shoulders as the temperature plummeted. The fire sputtered, fought briefly against the downpour, then died, plunging the area before the shelter into darkness broken only by lightning flashes. Between thunderclaps, in those moments of relative quiet filled only by the steady drumming of rain, I heard it, the sound of movement on the trail, not the random pattering of raindrops or wind-tossed branches, but the deliberate placement of feet. Someone, or something, was approaching the shelter. I fumbled for my headlamp, but before I could find it, lightning split the sky again, illuminating the trail before the shelter in harsh white light. A figure stood there, motionless in the deluge. A man, tall and gaunt, his clothes plastered against his thin frame by the rain. "Hello?" I called out, relief washing over me. Another hiker, caught in the storm. "There's room in here if you need shelter." The figure didn't respond or move. As the thunder faded, I called out again, louder this time. Still nothing. Then, slowly, the figure took a single step forward, entering the periphery of what little light spilled from my shelter. It was a man, or had been once. His face was sunken, cheeks hollow beneath a scruff of beard, eyes deep-set and shadowed. He wore standard hiking gear, though the clothes hung from his frame as if they belonged to someone much larger. But what struck me most was his stillness. Even as rain plastered his dark hair to his skull and ran in rivulets down his face, he barely seemed to blink. "Are you okay?" I asked, instinctively shrinking back toward the rear wall of the shelter. "Do you need help?" When he finally spoke, his voice was a dry rasp that somehow carried over the storm's fury. "Are you Michelle Young?" Ice water seemed to replace the blood in my veins. I hadn't told anyone on the trail my full name. "How do you know my name?" I demanded, fear making my voice sharper than intended. "I've been looking for you." He took another step forward, now fully within the meager light cast by my lantern. His movements were wrong, jerky and uncoordinated, as if he were a puppet operated by an inexperienced handler. "Jackson sent me." The name struck me like a physical blow. Jackson, the man from the camera photos, the hiker who had disappeared. "That's not possible," I whispered. A smile spread across the man's face, too wide, stretching his cracked lips to the point of bleeding. "Nothing is impossible in Hollow Gap. Michelle, haven't you learned that yet?" He cocked his head at an unnatural angle. "You have something that belongs to us. The camera. Jackson wants it back." My hand went instinctively to my pack where I'd stowed the muddy camera after my panic subsided. "Who are you?" I asked, playing for time, my mind racing for a way out of this situation. "Thomas Davis," he replied, the name falling from his lips like an ill-practiced line. "I'm a hiker, like you." His eyes, which had been fixed on my face with uncomfortable intensity, suddenly rolled upward, showing only whites for a moment before returning to normal. "Jackson and Megan are waiting. They sent me to bring you to them." "They're alive?" The question escaped before I could stop it, a foolish display of the hope I couldn't quite suppress. Thomas's smile widened impossibly further. "Alive is subjective. In the hollow. They're changed. Like me." His head twitched violently to one side. "Better, and you will be too." Lightning struck nearby with a deafening crack, momentarily blinding me. When my vision cleared, Thomas stood directly before the shelter, not 3 feet away from me, though I hadn't seen or heard him move. "You shouldn't have come here, Michelle," he said, his voice suddenly different, higher, with a sing-song quality that raised the hairs on my arms. "But since you did, you have to meet the Hollow Mother. She's been so hungry since the Rangers started warning people away." He reached for me, his arm extending toward my ankle. I kicked out reflexively, my boot connecting with his reaching hand. There was a crack. Not the sound of breaking bones, but something harder, like snapping wood. Thomas didn't flinch or cry out. He looked down at his hand, now bent at an impossible angle from the wrist, a jagged splinter of what looked like white wood protruding from the torn skin. The wound didn't bleed. "That was rude," Thomas said, his voice dropping to a guttural growl. "The Hollow Mother doesn't like rudeness." I scrambled backward, knocking over my pack in my haste. The camera tumbled out, sliding across the wooden floor of the shelter. Thomas's eyes fixed on it, his ruined hand momentarily forgotten. "Yes," he hissed. "That's it. That's what she wants." I lunged for my trekking poles, still leaning against the wall where I'd placed them earlier. Gripping one in each hand, I faced Thomas, the lightweight aluminum suddenly feeling inadequate against whatever this thing was. "Stay back," I warned, jabbing one pole forward for emphasis. Thomas looked from the camera to me, calculation evident in his unnaturally still expression. Then he smiled again, and the smell hit me, that same rotting odor I'd encountered by the pool, now emanating from him in waves. "The camera, or you," he said simply. "The Hollow Mother must be fed." Another lightning flash, another moment of blindness. When my vision returned, Thomas was gone. So was the camera. I spent the remainder of that terrible night huddled in the back corner of the shelter, trekking poles clutched in white-knuckled hands, jumping at every sound carried by the storm. Sleep was impossible, even after the rain subsided to a gentle patter shortly before dawn. The rising sun revealed a washed-out landscape, the trail before the shelter transformed into a shallow stream by the night's deluge. Of Thomas Davis, there was no sign, no footprints in the mud, no indication anyone had stood before my shelter in the storm. I broke camp with shaking hands, forcing down a few bites of granola bar for energy, though my stomach rebelled at the thought of food. The ranger station was 6 miles away. In normal conditions, I could cover that distance in 2, maybe 3 hours. I intended to do it in less. The going was difficult at first. The trail had suffered in the storm, with small washouts and downed branches creating obstacles every few hundred yards. But as the sun rose higher, burning off the lingering mist, my spirits lifted marginally. Whatever horror lurked in Hollow Gap seemed unable or unwilling to pursue me this far from its domain. I reached the ranger station shortly before noon, my boots caked with mud, my clothes still damp from rain and sweat. The ranger behind the desk, not the same one who had checked my permit, looked up in surprise as I burst through the door. "Whoa there," he said, rising from his chair. "You okay, miss?" The concern in his voice nearly undid me. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself, suddenly aware of how I must look, wild-eyed, filthy, trembling with exhaustion and residual fear. "I need to report something," I managed. "In Hollow Gap." The ranger's expression shifted subtly. "Why don't you sit down?" he suggested, gesturing to a chair beside his desk. "I'll get you some water." As I sank gratefully into the chair, he filled a paper cup from a dispenser in the corner. "Now," he said, returning to hand me the water. "What happened out there?" I opened my mouth, then closed it again, suddenly unsure where to begin or what to say. How could I explain the wrongness of Hollow Gap, the deer with too many joints, the man who wasn't a man? It sounded insane even in my own mind. "I think I may have found evidence related to those missing hikers," I said finally, opting for the most concrete fact I could offer. Jackson Taylor and Megan Walsh. I found their camera." The ranger's eyebrows rose. "The couple from Ohio? They were reported missing about 2 weeks ago." He leaned forward. "Where's this camera now?" "It was stolen," I said, knowing how it sounded. "Last night during the storm, a man, he said his name was Thomas Davis. He took it." "Thomas Davis," the ranger repeated, writing the name in a notebook. "Can you describe him?" I did my best, leaving out the unnatural movements, the wooden bone, the impossible smile. Even sanitized, my description made the ranger frown. "Doesn't match any of our registered hikers," he said. "But there are a lot of access points to these trails. Could have come in from anywhere." He studied me for a moment. "Was there anything else unusual you noticed? Anything that might help us locate Taylor and Walsh?" A hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat, which I disguised as a cough. Unusual didn't begin to cover what I'd experienced. "They were camping in Hollow Gap," I said. "The same site I used 2 nights ago. And there's something wrong with that place. With the whole area." I hesitated, then added, "Did you know the compass doesn't work there? Or GPS?" The ranger's expression darkened. "There have been reports of unusual magnetic interference in that region," he acknowledged. "We've actually been discouraging hikers from using those trails until we can investigate further." "Magnetic interference doesn't explain what I saw," I insisted, immediately regretting my words when I saw the skepticism creep into his eyes. "And what exactly did you see, Miss Young, Michelle Young?" I took a deep breath. I don't know what I saw, but it wasn't natural, and I think Taylor and Walsh encountered it too. The last pictures on their camera. I trailed off, remembering that I no longer had the evidence. The ranger was watching me with what looked increasingly like pity. "Ms. Young, given extreme stress and isolation, it's not uncommon for hikers to experience heightened anxiety, even hallucinations. Especially after a traumatic event like finding personal effects of missing persons." "I'm not hallucinating," I snapped, anger momentarily overriding my exhaustion. "There's something in those woods, something that's taking people." The ranger held up his hands in a placating gesture. "I'm not dismissing your concerns. We take all reports seriously, especially when they might relate to missing hikers. I'll certainly document everything you've told me and pass it along to the search teams." He was humoring me. The realization was both infuriating and somehow relieving. If he didn't believe me, he wouldn't go to Hollow Gap. He would be safe. "Is there someone I can call for you?" he asked gently. "Someone who can pick you up?" I shook my head. "No, I have my car at the Seneca Creek trailhead." "That's about 15 miles from here by road," the ranger said. "I can give you a lift when my shift ends at 4, or call you a taxi from town if you prefer not to wait." I accepted his offer of a ride, too drained to contemplate navigating unfamiliar roads. While waiting, I cleaned up in the station's basic bathroom, changed into my spare clothes, and tried to impose some order on my tangled thoughts. The ranger brought me a sandwich from his own lunch, which I forced myself to eat despite my lingering nausea. As promised, he drove me to my car late that afternoon. The journey passed largely in silence, for which I was grateful. As we approached the trailhead parking lot, he finally spoke again. "You know, I've been working these mountains for 15 years, he said, his eyes fixed on the winding road ahead. "There are places in these forests that don't quite follow the rules, places the old-timers warned me about when I first started." I turned to look at him, surprised by this apparent change in attitude. "Hollow Gap was one of those places," he continued. "Local folklore calls it the Hollow Mother's Garden. Most of it's just superstition, of course, stories to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods." He paused. "But I will say this. In all my years here, I've never spent a night in Hollow Gap, and neither has any other ranger I know." He pulled into the parking lot, stopping beside my dusty sedan. "The search for Taylor and Walsh is ongoing, but they're not the first to go missing in these mountains. Probably won't be the last, either." "You believe me," I said, realization dawning. He shrugged. "I believe you experienced something that frightened you badly. Whether it was what you think it was, well, that's above my pay grade, but I'd stay clear of Hollow Gap in the future if I were you, Ms. Young." As I opened the door to exit his vehicle, he added, "And, Ms. Young, if you start having dreams about that place, about going back there, talk to someone, a professional. Those kinds of dreams, they have a way of getting under your skin." I nodded, thanked him for the ride, and watched as he drove away, the Department of Natural Resources logo on his truck door catching the late afternoon sun. Only when he disappeared around a bend did I finally get into my own car, my hands still not entirely steady as I inserted the key in the ignition. The drive home was a blur, my mind replaying the events in Hollow Gap on an endless loop. I stopped for the night at a motel just outside of Elkins, not trusting myself to make the full journey in my exhausted state. In the anonymous safety of the motel room, with its harsh fluorescent lighting and paper-thin walls through which I could hear my neighbor's television, I finally broke down, sobbing until my throat was raw and no more tears would come. I returned to Pittsburgh the next day, to my apartment with its familiar furniture and normal sounds, traffic outside my window, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock in my kitchen. I called in sick to work for the rest of the week, claiming a stomach virus picked up while camping. My boss was sympathetic, encouraging me to take the time I needed to recover. Physical recovery came quickly enough. The scratches and bruises from my headlong flight through the forest faded. My muscles stopped aching from the exertion of covering miles at a near run. But sleep remained elusive, fractured by nightmares when it came at all. In these dreams, I'm always back in Hollow Gap, following a trail that grows increasingly unfamiliar. Sometimes I'm searching for Alicia, sometimes for the missing hikers, sometimes for something I can't quite name, and always, just beyond the next bend in the path, something waits for me, something I know I don't want to see but am compelled to seek out nonetheless. 3 weeks after my return, I received a small package in the mail. No return address, postmarked from Franklin, West Virginia, a small town near Monongahela National Forest. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a memory card in a small plastic case. No note, no explanation. Just the card. I should have thrown it away, should have dropped it down the garbage disposal or smashed it with a hammer. Instead, with a sense of inevitability that felt almost like relief, I inserted it into my laptop. The thumbnails loaded slowly, dozens of images, then hundreds. The first few were familiar, Jackson and Megan, smiling in the sunshine, documenting their hike. I scrolled through quickly, my heart racing as I neared the end of their photographic journey. Then came new images. Photos I hadn't seen on the camera I found. Photos taken after the one showing the faceless figure by their tent. They documented a descent into horror I can scarcely bring myself to describe even now. Jackson and Megan in Hollow Gap, their faces transformed by terror as they encountered something. The sequence was chaotic, many images blurred by motion or darkness, but a few were crystal clear, showing glimpses of what lurked in the remote hollow, elongated limbs reaching from between trees, faces that shifted and flowed like wax beneath a flame, the earth itself seeming to rise and take form. The final clear image showed Megan, her expression no longer frightened but eerily serene. She stood beside a massive hemlock, her hand resting on its trunk in an almost tender gesture. But her arm was wrong, no longer fully human, the skin bark-like, her fingers elongated into twig-like appendages that seemed to be merging with the tree itself. The last photo was of Thomas Davis, the man who had confronted me at the shelter. In the image, he stood in front of a mirror, his shirt off, revealing a torso that was more wood than flesh, rough bark spreading across his chest from a knothole over his heart. His expression was one of rapturous acceptance as he captured his own transformation. Following the photos were several video files. My cursor hovered over the first one, my better judgment warring with a compulsion I couldn't explain. In the end, curiosity won. Or perhaps something darker, some subtle influence that had followed me from that accursed place. The video began with Jackson's face filling the frame, his features gaunt, eyes sunken with exhaustion or illness. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse, as if he'd been screaming. "If anyone finds this," he began, "stay away from Hollow Gap. There's something there, something old and hungry." He glanced over his shoulder, then leaned closer to the camera. "It got Megan first. I thought she was just tired, or maybe had picked up a parasite from the water. She started having dreams, talking about the Hollow Mother calling to her." He ran a trembling hand through his dirty hair. "By the time I realized something was really wrong, she was changing. Physically changing. And now it's happening to me too." He pulled down the collar of his shirt, revealing the same knothole I'd seen in the photo of Thomas, though smaller, just beginning to form. I can feel it growing inside me, replacing me, cell by cell. And the worst part is, part of me welcomes it. The video cut abruptly, then resumed showing a different setting, deeper in the forest, the light filtered green through a dense canopy. Jackson now looked significantly worse, his skin taking on a grayish wooden texture, his movements stiff and unnatural. "The Hollow Mother is ancient," he said without preamble, his voice now containing an odd resonance, as if multiple voices spoke in imperfect unison. "She was here before the mountains rose, before humans walked these lands, and she hungers for consciousness, for the spark of awareness that she herself lacks." He smiled, a terrible stretching of his face that reminded me all too vividly of Thomas. She takes us into herself, absorbs what makes us human while leaving our memories, our identities as echoes, seeds to lure others. His gaze shifted, focusing on something beyond the camera. "Megan is almost fully transformed now. I will be soon, and others will come, despite the warnings. They always do." His eyes returned to the camera, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of the real Jackson, terrified, trapped within a body no longer fully his own. "Run," he whispered. "If you're watching this, run, before the dreams begin." The video ended there. I sat motionless before my laptop, the room around me suddenly alien and threatening despite its familiarity, because I knew, with a certainty that transcended rational thought, that the dreams had already begun. That night, as I finally fell into exhausted slumber, I dreamed of Hollow Gap once more. But this time, I wasn't alone. Alicia walked beside me, though her movements had the same wrong quality I'd seen in Thomas and Jackson. And as we descended into the gap, she turned to me with a smile that stretched too wide. "The Hollow Mother is waiting, Michelle," she said, her voice layered with others: Jackson, Megan, Thomas, and something else, something ancient and hungry. "She's been waiting for you since you first found me at the bottom of that cliff." I woke screaming, my sister's name on my lips. Dawn was breaking, pale light filtering through my blinds. My phone was in my hand, though I had no memory of reaching for it. The screen showed a map application open, a route plotted from Pittsburgh to the Seneca Creek trailhead. With hands that shook so badly I nearly dropped the device, I deleted the application from my phone entirely. Then I showered under water hot enough to scald, scrubbing my skin until it was raw, as if I could wash away the lingering touch of Hollow Gap. That day, I made 2 decisions. First, I made an appointment with a trauma specialist, not my regular therapist, but someone recommended for work with those who've experienced life-threatening situations. Second, I booked a flight to San Diego, as far from the Appalachians as I could reasonably go without leaving the country. Before I left, I wrote down everything that had happened, every detail I could remember. I sent copies to the Monongahela National Forest headquarters, the West Virginia State Police, and the families of Jackson Taylor and Megan Walsh. I don't know if anyone believed me. I don't know if anyone even investigated. Part of me hopes they didn't, that no one else has ventured into Hollow Gap searching for answers they're better off not finding. It's been 8 months since I fled Pittsburgh. The dreams haven't stopped entirely, but they've grown less frequent, less vivid. My therapist calls it progress. I call it distance, as if whatever dwells in Hollow Gap has a reach that attenuates over miles. Sometimes, though, when I'm hiking the sun-drenched trails of Torrey Pines or walking along the Pacific shore, I feel a phantom chill, a cold breath on the back of my neck that carries the scent of pine and rotting leaves, and in those moments, I know with dread certainty that the Hollow Mother hasn't forgotten me. She's patient. She can wait, because the seed has been planted, in my dreams, in my memories, in the hollow part of me that formed when Alicia died. One day, I fear, it will take root and grow, and when it does, I'll find myself driving east, drawn inexorably back to the ancient, hungry darkness that waits in Hollow Gap. I write this now as both warning and confession. If you're planning a hike in the Appalachians, particularly the remote sections of Monongahela National Forest, stay on the marked trails. Stay in groups, and above all, stay away from Hollow Gap, from the Hollow Mother's Garden. And if you begin to dream of a forest where compasses spin uselessly and streams flow against gravity, if you wake with an inexplicable longing to walk beneath ancient hemlocks in a place where the air hangs heavy with decay, get as far away as you can. Run before the dreams take hold. Run before you feel the first tendril of rootwood sprouting within your chest. Run while you're still fully human, because I'm not sure how much longer I will be. Last week, I found a small hard bump over my heart, round and smooth, like a knot beginning to form in living wood. And when I press my ear to it in the silence of night, I swear I can hear whispers. Alicia, Thomas, Jackson, Megan, and countless others, all calling me home to Hollow Gap. I've booked another appointment with my therapist. I've purchased a small, sharp axe that I keep beside my bed. And I've written this account, hoping that someone will read it and understand what happened to me if I should disappear. My name is Michelle Young. I am 32 years old, and I am afraid that I am becoming something else, something ancient and hungry that walks on too many limbs through forgotten hollows where the rules of reality grow thin. If you're reading this and you know someone who's gone missing in the Appalachians, someone who was last known to be hiking alone through remote wilderness, I'm sorry, they might still exist after a fashion, but they belong to the Hollow Mother now, and may God help me, part of me longs to join them.